Tonight, we're exploring the strangest mysteries hidden across the Pokémon regions. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here, and if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Think for a moment about the ground beneath your feet in the world of Pokémon. We often treat these landscapes as simple backdrops for a journey of collection and competition, but if you look closer at the geography of the Sinnoh peaks, the desert sands of Hoenn, or the crystalline depths of Paldea, you start to realize that the history we are told in the games is only a thin veil over a much darker, more chaotic past. We are taught that the world is a place of harmony between humans and Pokémon, yet every single region is scarred by the remnants of events that defy modern scientific understanding. There are towers that burned for reasons no one can truly explain, ruins etched with a language that predates modern humanity, and craters that shouldn't exist according to the laws of geology. The stakes of understanding this lore go far beyond simple trivia. When we piece together the fragments of the ancient world, we discover that the Pokémon universe has been on the brink of total annihilation more times than the history books care to admit. We aren't just looking at old buildings. We are looking at the fingerprints of cosmic beings and the fallout of weapons that could reshape reality itself. Why is it that every culture across the globe has a different story for how the world began? And why do those stories often involve catastrophic wars or divine intervention from creatures that still walk among us? We are talking about a world where the very fabric of time and space is held together by living entities, where the land and sea were carved out in a primal struggle for dominance, and where the energy used to evolve a single Pokémon might actually be the same energy that once fueled a weapon of mass destruction. The mystery deepens when you realize the patterns. Across different continents, separated by thousands of miles of ocean, the same themes emerging. Ancient civilizations that possess technology far beyond what today, only to vanish into the shadows of history. The influence of extraterrestrial forces, from meteors that carry the seeds of infinite power to holes in the sky that lead to dimensions where the laws of physics simply don't apply. Was the Pokémon world always meant to be this way, or is the current era just a brief moment of peace in a cycle of cosmic upheaval? Are we living in the aftermath of a golden age, or are we standing on the ruins of a world that was broken and stitched back together by the hands of a creator who has since fallen silent? Every region hides a different kind of secret. In some places, the mystery is historical, a forgotten war that changed the trajectory of a people. In others, it is scientific, an anomaly in the earth that produces impossible phenomena. And, in the most chilling cases, the mystery is cosmic, involving beings that existed before the concept of a region even had a name. Tonight, we are going to peel back those layers. We are going to travel from the earliest days of Kanto and Johto to the modern enigmas of the Great Crater. We will look at the artifacts that shouldn't exist, the myths that feel a little too much like eyewitness accounts, and the silent witnesses of the past that still stand in the middle of our bustling cities. This is a journey into the deep prehistory of the Pokémon world, a search for the truth behind the legends, and an attempt to understand what really happened in the thousands of years before we ever picked up our first Pokéball. We are diving into the shadows of the map to find what has been hidden in plain sight. The silence of the ancients. That phrase hangs over the Kanto region like a fog you can never quite see through. When you walk through the old routes, past the ruins of ancient towers and the abandoned mansions, you start to feel it, a strange absence. Pokémon has a creation story, but Kanto does not. That is the paradox at the heart of this chapter. We know the modern world of Pokémon is one of relative peace, of friendly battles and Pokémon centers and a league that governs with a gentle hand. But beneath that surface, the archaeological record screams something else entirely. Look at the ruins scattered across Kanto, the Pokémon Tower in Lavender Town, the 7-story cemetery, the ancient ruins where you can summon Aerodactyl from an old amber, the massive underground tunnels connecting Cerulean City to places unknown. None of these were built by a peaceful society. They suggest a past that was brutal, efficient, and deeply concerned with death and preservation. And then there is the most unsettling piece of evidence: the war. You might remember Lieutenant Surge, the Vermilion City gym leader. He calls himself the Lightning American, and he tells you that Pokémon saved his life during the war. Which war? The games never say. But it is there, a single line of dialogue that opens a chasm. The implication is that Kanto, the region we first explore, emerged from a global conflict not too long ago, a war fought with Pokémon as weapons. And yet, when you look at Kanto's mythology, there is nothing. No creation myth, no story of how the world began. Sinnoh has Arceus and the creation trio. Hoenn has Groudon and Kyogre shaping the land and sea. Johto has the legendary beasts and Ho-Oh. But Kanto? The closest you get is Mew, the ancestor of all Pokémon, but even that is a scientific theory, not a myth. There is no temple to Mew, no ancient text describing its role in creation. The silence is deliberate. Perhaps that silence is the aftermath of the war. A culture that forgot its own origins because the memory was too painful, or because the records were destroyed. Or perhaps Kanto never had a creation myth because its civilization was not the first. The ruins suggest something older, something that predates the modern Kanto. The burned tower is the key. In Ecruteak City, just across the border into Johto, stands the burned tower. It was once a grand structure, but it was struck by lightning and burned to the ground centuries ago. The story goes that 3 unnamed Pokémon perished in the fire. Beautiful, powerful creatures that no one had ever seen before. They were gone, lost to the flames, and then Ho-Oh descended from the sky. It resurrected them. The 3 Pokémon were reborn as Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, and they fled into the wilds, never to be captured by human hands. That is the official legend. But listen to what it implies. Resurrection is possible. A legendary Pokémon brought the dead back to life. That changes everything. If Ho-Oh can do that, what else can the legendaries do? And why did such a miracle happen in Johto, just next door to a Kanto that has no creation story? The burned tower is a scar, a reminder that the past is not gone. It is just waiting to return. The implications of resurrection are deeply unsettling because they suggest that death is not final in this world. There is a cycle, and it is older than any of the regions we know. The silence of Kanto's ancients might actually be a warning. They are not speaking because they do not want to wake whatever lies beneath. When you piece it together, the modern Pokémon world feels like a thin crust over a boiling prehistory. The paradox is that almost every region has a catastrophe in its past. A war, a fire, a cataclysm, yet the present seems so calm. That is the mystery. How many times has this world been reset? How many civilizations rose and fell before the one in the games? And what caused Kanto to forget its own gods? The answer might lie not in Kanto, but in the region that holds the actual creation story. Sinnoh. There, the silence is broken by a single almighty voice, and that story is far stranger than you could ever imagine. From the silence of Kanto's empty creations myths, we turn north to the region where the world itself was born, Sinnoh. Here, the archaeological record does not whisper. It screams, and at the center of that scream is a name, Almighty Sinnoh. But here's the first crack in the story. The people of ancient Sinnoh did not agree on what Almighty Sinnoh actually was. They split into 2 clans, the Diamond Clan and the Pearl Clan. One believed the creator was a being of time, the other a being of space. And they both believed they were right. This schism is not a footnote in Sinnoh's history. It is the foundation of its entire mythology. The Diamond Clan saw the universe as a thread, woven second by second. The Pearl Clan saw it as a canvas, stretched across an infinite void. Both were correct, but neither could see the full picture. And so they built their faith around separate fragments of the same truth. This brings us to Spear Pillar. It sits atop Mount Coronet, the spine of Sinnoh, the mountain that itself was formed by the same primordial forces. But Spear Pillar is not a natural formation. It is a structure, and it should not exist. The stones that form its columns, the alignment of its central platform, they are precisely oriented to the movements of the stars, but not the stars of any known epoch. Astronomers who have studied Sinnoh's ancient ruins have noted that Spear Pillar's axis matches a celestial configuration that would have been visible only thousands of years before recorded history. It is a temple built to a sky that no longer exists. The architecture is impossible for a prehistoric civilization. The mathematics alone would require generations of observation, yet there is no evidence of any settlement capable of such knowledge at that altitude. The only explanation, if we take the myths literally, is that Spear Pillar was not built by human hands. It was a stage, a meeting place, a point where the fabric of reality was thin enough for time and space to be witnessed. And what was witnessed there? The artifacts, the adamant crystal, the lustrous globe, the Griseous core. These are not tools, they are not weapons. They are fragments of the original act of creation. The myths say they were left behind by Almighty Sinnoh itself. But if that is true, then they predate not just human civilization. They predate the concept of civilization itself. They were here before the first village was built, before the first language was spoken, and yet they were discovered. They were held. The Diamond Clan used the adamant crystal to commune with what they believed was the essence of time. The Pearl Clan used the lustrous globe to reach across dimensions. And the Griseous core? That one is different. It was hidden, feared, associated with a being banished to a world of antimatter. A being that Sinnoh's own creation myth says was cast into a dimension where time does not. Flow and space does not expand. That artifact is the key to understanding why the schism between the clans was not just a religious disagreement, it was a warning. The deeper you dig into Sinnoh's genesis, the more you realize that the creation myth is not a metaphor. It is a literal event. The region is built on the scars of that event. Mount Coronet is the axis, Spear Pillar is the altar, the artifacts are the remnants, and the story of the Diamond and Pearl clans is the human attempt to understand something that was never meant to be understood. That understanding would come later, but not here. Not in this chapter, because there is one being who stands above even the lords of time and space, one being who existed before the concept of existence. And that is where our next journey takes us, into the void before the beginning, into the story of the original one. But to truly understand what the Diamond and Pearl clans were actually arguing about, we need to go beyond the stones and the celestial bodies they named themselves after. We need to look at the moment before time and space themselves were even a concept. We need to deconstruct the legend of the Thousand Arms and the birth of the universe. The myth of the Thousand Arms is not a story about a violent, many-limbed beast. It is a creation story, one that predates every known civilization in the Pokémon world. In ancient Sinnoh, it was said that before the world existed, there was only a single egg, floating in a void of absolute nothingness. From that egg emerged a being so powerful that it could not be contained by any single form. That being, the original one, then shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms. But of course, the 1,000 arms are not literal appendages. They are metaphors for the countless creative forces that radiated from that first entity. Each arm represented a different thread of reality, a different aspect of existence that had to be woven together to form the fabric of the cosmos. This is where the legend becomes deeply fascinating. The myth claims that as the original one moved through the void, its 1,000 arms created the building blocks of everything we know, the swirling nebulae, the planets, the laws of physics, the very flow of time itself. But then something changed. The act of creation was so immense that it fractured the original one into multiple beings. Some stories say the 3 lakes were formed from the tears of this fragmentation. Others say the 3 dragons of Sinnoh were born directly from the original one's will. Yet what is consistent across every telling is this. The very first act of creation was not an explosion, but a separation. The separation of time, space, and antimatter. And that separation happened in a place that the ancient texts call the Hall of Origin. The Hall of Origin is not a palace. It is not a temple built by human hands. It is a space that exists outside the conventional flow of time entirely. Imagine a dimension where past, present, and future are not a line, but a single point, where causality itself has no meaning. The Hall of Origin sits at the center of this paradox. It is the room where the original one waits, observing the universe it made, but never directly intervening. Or so the stories say. But if the Hall of Origin is truly outside time, then how can any being ever reach it? How can a mortal creature even find a door that exists in no known coordinate of space? This is where the evidence of Arceus's intervention in human history becomes undeniable. The Azure Flute, an artifact so rare and so specific that only a handful of records even mention its existence. According to the old myths, the Azure Flute was not made by humans. It was a gift left behind by the original one itself, hidden in the ruins of the past for a chosen few to find. When played at the peak of Mount Coronet, at the very spot where the Diamond and Pearl clans once performed their rituals, the flute's melody does not produce ordinary sound. It resonates with the frequency of the Hall of Origin. It literally tears a hole in the fabric of reality, allowing the player to step through time and space into the chamber of the creator. Think about what that means. The Azure Flute suggests that Arceus did not simply create the universe and abandon it. It left a means of contact, a key, hidden in the world. But why? Why leave a door open for mortals to enter the realm of a god? Some scholars argue it was a test, a way to see if any being, human or Pokémon, could prove themselves worthy of understanding the true nature of reality. Others believe the flute is evidence of a much darker truth, that the original one is not a passive creator, but a being that has always been watching, waiting for a specific moment to intervene again. The legend of the Thousand Arms, the Hall of Origin, and the Azure Flute together form a narrative that is far more complex than a simple creation myth. They hint at a universe that is not finished, a universe that is still being shaped, still being refined by forces beyond our comprehension. And if the Hall of Origin truly exists outside time, then the act of creation is not something that happened billions of years ago. It is happening right now, every moment, in a place we cannot see, from a perspective we cannot grasp. But what of the entity that was created alongside time and space? What of the one that was cast out, banished to a realm that is not a realm, to a dimension of pure distortion? If the Hall of Origin is the seat of the Creator, then there is another place, a prison world, that holds a secret that may change everything we think we know about the beginning. That story belongs to the Distortion world Anomaly, and it is a tale that begins not with light, but with darkness. We left off at the Hall of Origin, that impossible chamber where time flows in a loop and space bends around a single point of light. It is a room that should not exist, built for a being that does not belong to any dimension we can measure. And yet, it is only the beginning of Sinnoh's deepest secret. Because if the Hall of Origin represents the apex of creation, a place where the universe was born, then there is another realm, one that exists as its mirror, its shadow, its opposite. A place that was never meant to hold life. A place where the laws of physics were abandoned before they were even written. This is the Distortion world, and its story begins with a banishment. When Arceus shaped the three pillars of reality from the materials of the primordial chaos, it gave each one a purpose. Dialga would govern the flow of time, ensuring that every moment followed the one before it. Palkia would hold the fabric of space, stretching and folding it to create the boundaries of existence. But the third being, Giratina, was given a different task. It was not meant to maintain order. It was meant to govern antimatter, the force that opposes the very substance of the universe. And here is where the myth becomes strange, because in most creation stories, antimatter is not cast out. It is simply a counterpart, a balancing force. But in Sinnoh's ancient records, the act of creation was not a peaceful process. It was a violent eruption, and something went wrong. The legends say that Giratina was banished for its violence. But what does violence mean to a being that exists outside the structure of time and space? Perhaps it was not violence in the way we understand it. Perhaps Giratina's very nature, the ability to annihilate matter on contact, made it an existential threat to the fragile order that Dialga and Palkia were trying to maintain. Or perhaps the banishment was not a punishment at all. Perhaps it was a necessity, because if antimatter touched normal matter, both would be destroyed. And so Arceus tore open a pocket of reality, or rather, a pocket of unreality, and cast Giratina into a dimension where nothing else could exist. A dimension without stability. A dimension that would become known as the Distortion world. Imagine a place where gravity is not a constant, but a suggestion, where up and down are meaningless, because the ground itself can shift into walls, and walls can become ceilings, and ceilings can collapse into endless corridors of floating rock. Where time does not move forward in a straight line, it loops, it skips, it reverses. Where the concept of distance is broken, so that two objects can be miles apart and yet touching, or side by side and yet separated by an invisible rift that cannot be crossed. This is the world Giratina was forced to inhabit. It is not a prison in the traditional sense. There are no bars, no guards, no walls, but it is a prison nonetheless because there is no exit. Only an endless labyrinth of impossible geometry where the only constant is the presence of the banished one. And yet there is a crack, a single, fragile point of contact between the Distortion world and the realm of normal matter. It is hidden on Sinnoh's mainland, in a place called Turnback Cave. If you were to travel to the island of New Moon, you would find a tiny islet with a cave entrance barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The cave is not marked on most maps, and even locals rarely speak of it. But those who have entered describe a strange sensation, as if the air itself is humming with an energy that does not belong. The passage twists and turns, and the deeper you go, the more the walls seem to change. Pillars of rock appear where there were none before. The floor slopes in ways that defy physics. And then, after a series of chambers that seem to shift their layout every time you blink, you reach the deepest room. It is here that the veil between worlds is thinnest. Why here of all places? The answer may lie in the geology of Sinnoh itself. Mount Coronet runs like a spine through the entire region, a mountain range that is literally the result of the original creation. The ancient texts say that Arceus shaped the land around this peak, and that the mountain is the axis around which the universe revolves. If that is true, then Turnback Cave is a fault line in the fabric of reality, a place where the stress of creation itself has left a weak spot, a window into the Distortion world. But looking through that window comes with a cost. There are records, mostly oral, passed down through the clans of ancient Sinnoh, of individuals who ventured too deep into Turnback Cave. Some returned, but they were never the same. They spoke of from the outside, of glimpsing a dimension where everything they knew was inverted. They described the feeling of falling upward, of watching their own bodies from a distance, of hearing sounds that had no source. The psychological toll was immense. One account tells of a Pearl Clan scout who entered the cave in search of a lost companion. He emerged 3 days later, unable to speak, his eyes fixed on a point that seemed to be somewhere beyond the sky. For the rest of his life, he would only write symbols that no one could decipher, lines and loops that resembled the spirals of the Distortion world. He had seen the reverse side of reality, and his mind could not reconcile what he had witnessed with the world he had left behind. This is the true horror of Giratina's banishment, isn't it? Not the physical isolation, but the psychological isolation. To exist in a place where nothing makes sense, where the very fabric of reality is hostile to your perception, is a form of madness that no punishment could replicate. And yet, Giratina endured, it adapted. It became the master of that twisted dimension, learning to navigate the floating islands and shifting gravity with an ease that would be impossible for any mortal. But it never forgot the world it was cast out from. And that is why Turnback Cave remains a place of profound danger. Because if you enter, if you find the deepest chamber, you are not just observing the Distortion world. You are announcing your presence to its king. The old stories warn that Giratina can sense when someone crosses the veil. It can feel the disturbance in the antimatter field, the slight warp in the local gravity, the tiny ripple in the flow of time, and sometimes it responds. There are whispers of explorers who entered Turnback Cave and never came out, their bodies never found, their belongings scattered across the cavern floor as if they had simply been erased. Others claim to have seen a shadow passing behind them, a shape with 6 legs and wings that seem to fold into themselves like origami made of darkness. To witness Giratina in its own domain is to see the form of a being that has no fixed shape, because in a dimension without stability, form is merely a suggestion. It can be a serpent, a ghost, a dragon, or a cloud of pure antiparticles. And to look upon it without protection is to risk your own dissolution. But there is another theory, one that few scholars are willing to entertain. What if the Distortion world is not a prison, but a sanctuary? What if Giratina was not banished for violence, but because it chose to leave? Consider the chaos of the primordial universe, the violent clash of matter and antimatter that preceded the creation of Dialga and Palkia. In that chaos, Giratina may have been the only being that could thrive. When Arceus imposed order, it created a world that was hostile to antimatter. Giratina may have simply retreated to a dimension where it could exist without constantly annihilating everything around it. Turnback Cave, then, is not a window into a prison. It is a door that Giratina left open, in case it ever wanted to return. And across the ocean, in the warm waters of Hoenn, a different kind of chaos whispers from the deep. The primal energies that once tore the sky apart are stirring again, and the battle between land and sea is about to resume. But that is a story for another night. But from the fractured dimension of Sinnoh, we must now turn our gaze southward, to a region where the earth itself still bears the memory of a war between gods. Hoenn, a land defined by volatile geography, volcanoes that breathe raw creation, oceans that hide abyssal trenches, and at its heart, a crater so perfect it looks like the work of a celestial architect. And perhaps it was. The geological scars left by the clash between Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre are not subtle. They are written in the very bones of the continent. The magma that forged Mount, Chimney, the currents that carve the route between Slateport and Dewford. These are not random features. They are the aftermath of a battle where two forces of nature, stripped of restraint, tried to remake the world in their image. When Kyogre expanded the seas, it didn't just raise the water level. It reshaped coastlines, drowned forests, and left marine fossils on what would become mountain peaks. When Groudon pulled the land upward, it didn't just create new islands. It tore the seafloor, bled lava into the ocean, and solidified rock into fresh continents overnight. But there is one scar that stands above all others, a wound that refuses to heal, the Setopolis crater. This is not a simple volcanic caldera. It is a perfect circular depression, almost geometrically precise, carved into the center of a dormant volcano. The city of Setopolis sits inside it, surrounded by sheer rock walls that rise like the rim of an ancient basin. And the question that haunts every geologist in the Pokémon world is this: what made this crater? Was it a meteor strike? A chunk of cosmic debris that fell from the sky and punched through the Earth's crust? Or was it something else entirely? The evidence for a meteor is circumstantial at best. There is no impact debris, no telltale iridium layer, no shock-rippled rock that would indicate a high-velocity collision from space. Instead, the walls of Setopolis are layered in a pattern that suggests slow, deliberate uplift, then sudden catastrophic collapse, as if the land was pulled upward by some immense force, then punctured from below. And that is where the old legends begin to whisper. The people of Hoenn tell a story that predates any written record. They speak of a time when Groudon and Kyogre, in their primal forms, clashed not for territory, but for the very definition of existence. Groudon wanted land, Kyogre demanded sea, and their battle was so violent that the heavens themselves split open. But it was not a meteor that created the crater. It was the third being, Rayquaza. Rayquaza is not merely a legendary Pokémon. It is the celestial arbiter, the one who dwells in the ozone layer, watching the world from above. And when the primal forces raged, Rayquaza descended. The legends say it descended from the sky so fast that it created a vacuum, a column of pure energy that struck the earth and carved out the crater that would become Setopolis. The city's name, in fact, is a relic of that event, a word that in ancient Hoenn tongue meant the place where the sky touched the ground. But Rayquaza's intervention was not just a physical act, it was a metaphysical one. The power that Rayquaza displayed that day is the earliest known recorded instance of what we now call mega evolution. Not a stone, not a bond, but a raw primal energy that allowed a Pokémon to evolve beyond its natural limits for a single decisive moment. The lore of Hoenn suggests that Rayquaza was the first to achieve this state, and that its battle with Groudon and Kyogre was the origin point for the stones that later trainers would use. The meteorites that carry the energy of mega evolution are said to be fragments of Rayquaza's descent, pieces of the sky that rained down and left their power embedded in the earth. And yet, even with that cosmic intervention, the crater remains, a permanent reminder that Hoenn was once the stage for a conflict that could have ended the world. The Setopolis crater is not a scar of destruction, but a monument to balance. It exists because Rayquaza chose to stop the war, not by destroying the combatants, but by drawing a line in the earth that neither could cross. The city built inside that crater is a testament to that peace. But the walls still hum with residual energy. Divers who explore the waters of Setopolis report strange magnetic fields, pockets of water warmer than the surrounding sea, and occasionally the feeling that something ancient is watching from the depths. What is most unsettling, however, is that Hoenn's primal cataclysm is not unique. Across the world, there are other sealed powers, other ancient forces that were contained rather than destroyed. The region of Hoenn may have been saved by a celestial dragon, but elsewhere, the solutions were far more mechanical. There are structures built, not by nature, but by hands that understood a kind of science we have since forgotten. And next, we will venture to a place where the earth itself was used as a prison, where 3 ancient giants were sealed away, their slumber guarded by a mechanism that has never been explained. We saw the scars of Hoenn's ancient cataclysm, wounds carved into the earth by primal forces that predate any human memory. But those forces were not the only ancient power locked beneath the surface. There is another secret, one that does not speak of gods or titans of nature, but of something far quieter, far more deliberate. A message written in a language that cannot be spoken, pressed into stone panels across the Hoenn mainland. A language of raised dots. Braille. The Braille puzzle of Hoenn is not a riddle left for curious trainers to solve. It is a warning, a set of instructions crafted by a civilization so terrified of what they had created that they chose to seal it away, forever, behind barriers that required specific, ritualistic knowledge to even approach. The 3 chambers of the sealed giants, the Regis chamber, the Regirok chamber, and the Registeel chamber, are not temples, they are prisons, and the prisoners were not born, they were built. Let us begin with the geography. Across the mainland of Hoenn, 3 isolated ruins sit at coordinates that form a triangle, each one hidden in plain sight. The first, the Island Cave, lies off the coast of Route 105, accessible only by diving into the depths of the ocean. The second, the Desert Ruins, is buried in the sandstorms of Route 111, a place where the sun warps the air and visibility drops to nothing. The third, the Ancient Tomb, is tucked into a corner of Route 120, surrounded by thick grass and quiet waters. Each structure is simple, almost crude, a single room with a single stone panel, and each panel is covered in braille that has been worn smooth by millennia of wind and salt and time. The braille itself reveals a pattern. In the island cave, the message reads, "Stay and wait. Do not touch the stone, for one will be taken." In the desert ruins, the message is different, but the theme is identical. Stop, do not move. The one who disturbs the stone will be lost. In the ancient tomb, the warning takes a more direct form. Cut, do not cut. The one who cuts will be taken. These are not the words of a civilization offering enlightenment. They are the words of a people who knew exactly what they were guarding, and they wanted no one to find it. But to understand why they feared the Regi trio, we must first understand what the Regi trio are. Regis, Regirok, and Registeel are not legendary Pokémon in the traditional sense. They are artificial. They were created by ancient humans, sculpted from the raw materials of the earth, and then animated by a force we still do not fully understand. Regis was carved from a single block of ice that never melts, its body maintained at a temperature of -328 degrees Fahrenheit. Regirok was assembled from boulders and rocks, held together by some internal glue that no geologist has ever identified. Registeel is a shell of molten metal, a body that no known alloy can replicate. They are golems, machines, and their creators intended them to serve. But something went wrong. The braille scattered across Hoenn does not explain the failure outright, but the clues are embedded in the language of the chambers themselves. In the central chamber of the sealed giants, the largest braille inscription reads, "We who made you, we who gave you life, we who gave you power, we who gave you form, we who now seal you. You shall never move again. You shall never harm again. You shall never destroy again." This is not a prayer. It is a legal document, a contract, a binding confession. The humans who built these creatures were afraid of what they had unleashed, and the only solution they could devise was total, permanent confinement. Why? The evidence suggests that the Regi trio were not just weapons, but tools with an independent will. They could think, they could decide, and they did not agree with their masters. One fragment of a tablet recovered from the desert ruins mentions that Regirok refused to crush a village. Another, found beneath the sand near Route 111, describes how Registeel turned its heat vision upon the very city that forged it. The ancient humans did not simply imprison the Regi trio because they were dangerous. They imprisoned them because they had disobeyed. And disobedience in a creature built to obey is the most terrifying thing of all. Now map the chambers across the mainland. The triangle they form is not random. The points correspond to the 3 most geologically unstable regions of Hoenn. The volcanic slopes of Route 120, the seismic fault lines beneath Route 105, and the shifting sand dunes of the desert. The placement was deliberate. If the seals ever broke, the Regis trio would be released into environments that could neutralize them or destroy them. The cold of the ocean would freeze Regis solid. The heat of the desert would crack Regirock. The instability of the fault lines would swallow Registeel. The ancient architects were not just sealing the giants, they were engineering their destruction. But the most disturbing implication remains. These creatures were made by human hands. That means somewhere in the lost ages of Hoenn, there existed a civilization capable of creating life, not through breeding or evolution, but through direct, artificial construction. They chiseled ice into a being that could freeze entire oceans. They stacked rocks into a body that could reshape mountains. They poured metal into a shell that could absorb any blow. And then they realized their error. They realized that when you create a mind, you cannot control it forever. The Regis trio are not monsters. They are mirrors, reflecting the fear of their makers. Frozen in stone and ice and steel, the Braille chambers still stand. The seals remain unbroken for now, but the silence of those chambers is loud. It whispers of a forgotten war between builder and built, between creator and creation. And as we step away from the mainland of Hoenn, we cannot ignore the shadow that these golems cast across the rest of the world. Because if one civilization succeeded in creating artificial life, others may have tried as well. And some of those experiments may not have been sealed away. Some may have been given a crown. We left Hoenn with a mystery etched in stone. 6 sealed doors, 3 silent golems, and a language of dots and lines that no modern human had spoken for millennia. The Regis trio, Regis, Regirock and Registeel, were imprisoned not because they were dangerous in the way a rampaging legendary might be, but because they were tools. Tools created for a purpose far larger than guarding a cave. And if you followed the trail of Braille, from the desert to the island, from the ice to the iron, you would eventually find yourself asking the same question. Who made them, and why? The answer lies not in Hoenn, but far to the north, buried beneath the eternal snow of Sinnoh. There, in a temple that predates the settlements of Celestic Town, the king of the giants sleeps. And this king is no mere golem, he is a force of geography, Regigigas. The name alone suggests movement, mass, the grinding of tectonic plates. The Pokédex entries across generations are unusually consistent in their claim. Regigigas is said to have pulled the continents together with ropes. Think about that for a moment. Continental drift is a geological process that takes millions of years. A slow crawl of landmasses driven by mantle convection. But the myth of Regigigas proposes something else entirely. A single being, a living creature that physically towed the world's landmasses into place, not over eons but in a single act of creation. Did one Pokémon literally rearrange the geography of the planet? The legend survives in the Snowpoint Temple, a structure carved into the heart of a frozen mountain. The temple's architecture is unmistakably ancient, built from blocks of stone so precisely cut that no mortar was needed. But unlike the ruins of Hoenn, which were designed to keep something out, the Snowpoint Temple was built to keep something in, or rather, to keep it asleep. The innermost chamber is a vast hall of ice, lit only by the faint glow of the frost-covered walls. At its center, a pedestal of rock rises from the floor, and on that pedestal, Regigigas rests. But rest is not the right word. He slumbers. Not the sleep of exhaustion, but the sleep of duty fulfilled. A machine that has finished its work and powered down, waiting for the signal to wake again. Ancient Sinnoh texts describe Regigigas as the master of the golems, the one who shaped the Regis trio from rock, ice and steel. The Hoenn trio are not separate legends. They are extensions of Regigigas, mobile limbs that carried out its will across the continents. Regis was the hand that sculpted the frozen tundras, Regirok, the hand that raised the mountains. Regis, the hand that forged the deep foundations. When their work was done, the master commanded them to sleep, and they were sealed away in Hoenn. But why did Regis itself retreat to Sinnoh? Why not remain with its creations? The answer may lie in Sinnoh's unique connection to the original creation, the same region that houses Mount Coronet, the Pillar of the World, and the ruins that speak of Arceus, the original one. Regis is not a primordial force on the level of Dialga or Palkia, but it occupies a strange middle ground, a creature that reshaped the physical world after it was already formed. If Arceus created the universe, then Regis might have been the tool that gave that universe its final shape. The continents did not drift randomly. They were arranged. Mountains were placed. Oceans were separated. And then the giant slept, knowing its task was complete. But the connections between the Hoenn trio and the Sinnoh progenitor run deeper than mere construction. In the ruins of Hoenn, the Braille messages speak of a punishment, a warning that those who disturb the giants will suffer. This is not the language of a creator praising its work. It is the language of fear. The ancient Hoenn people knew that Regis's golems were too powerful to remain free, so they locked them away. They did not destroy them, because they could not. The same civilization that carved the Braille into stone may have known that the master golem still slumbered in the north and they lived, and find its servants missing. What would happen if Regis stirred? The Snowpoint Temple has no guards, no traps, no elaborate puzzles, only an icy stillness and a single requirement. You must bring the Regi trio to the temple, present them before the pedestal, and only then will the king open its eyes. This is not a test of strength, but a call to order. The giants were scattered, and the master waits for their reunion. If that reunion ever happens in the modern era, what would Regis do? Would it begin anew the work of pulling continents? Or would it look upon a world already shaped and see that its purpose is finished? The answer is locked in that frozen chamber, and the only thing keeping it from answering is the silence of centuries. As we stand in the shadows of Snowpoint, the cold seeping through our boots, we are reminded that not all mysteries are hidden in deep caves or beyond dimensional rifts. Some are sleeping right beneath our feet, waiting for the right key. And the next mystery is of a different kind, not of stone and ice, but of fire and sorrow. A tragedy so complete that it erased not just a kingdom, but the memory of an entire era. That story begins with a single flower, a war that lasted for no reason, and a weapon that turned a king into a ghost, the Kalosian Holocaust. From the frozen silence of Snowpoint Temple, where Regis slumbers in eternal vigil over a continent it may have once moved, we now turn to a different kind of stillness. A silence not of ice and snow, but of stone and ash. A silence that has lasted 3,000 years. The Kalos region is beautiful. Rolling hills, quaint towns, and ancient forests hide something far darker beneath their surface. Travel to Geosenge town, and you'll find a peaceful community nestled among strange stone circles. The locals will tell you the stones are just part of the landscape, weathered by time and weather. They won't tell you the truth. They might not even know it themselves. Beneath those stones, beneath the very earth of Geosenge, lies a mass grave. Tens of thousands of Pokémon, their life force drained in a single cataclysmic event. This is the site of the Kalosian Holocaust, a war so devastating that it reshaped not just the land, but the very concept of mortality for one man. The war itself was a conflict that raged across the entire region of Kalos. Historians in the Pokémon world have pieced together fragments of its origins, but the full picture remains buried in the rubble of a forgotten kingdom. What we know is that it was a war between two sides, likely humans fighting over territory or ideology, but the true cost was paid by Pokémon. They were used as soldiers, as weapons, as shields. The battlefield became a charnel house. For 3,000 years, bones of these creatures have rested in the soil, their suffering long since absorbed into the earth. But the war did not end with a peace treaty or a surrender. It ended with a weapon, the ultimate weapon, a device of unimaginable power, designed by a king who had lost everything. His name was AZ. He was a ruler of a prosperous kingdom. But the war took his beloved Pokémon, a creature named Ange. In his grief, he demanded that his scientists build something that could end the war forever. They constructed a weapon powered by the life force of Pokémon, and to fuel it, they needed a sacrifice vast beyond comprehension. That sacrifice was the death of thousands of Pokémon, not in battle, but in a single deliberate act of annihilation. Their life energy was drained and stored, then channeled into the ultimate weapon. When it fired, it unleashed a blast of energy that destroyed the opposing army and ended the war. But the cost was not just the lives of those Pokémon. AZ himself was changed. He had designed the weapon to be linked to his own life force, so that he could personally activate it. When the weapon fired, it did not kill him. Instead, it made him immortal. He could not die. He would watch the centuries pass, every day a reminder of the lives he had extinguished. The weapon's energy had bound itself to his very soul, a permanent scar of the genocide he had triggered. AZ wandered the earth, alone, immortal, haunted. He tried to rebuild, but the guilt was a weight that no amount of time could lessen. He became a legend himself, a tall, gaunt figure seen in the shadows of Geosenj town, sometimes weeping, sometimes silent. Some say he still walks those stone circles, waiting for a redemption that will never come. Geosenj town, then, is not just a quiet village. It is a monument, a mass grave, a reminder of what happens when grief turns into hubris. The stones that form the circles are not natural. They are the remains of the weapon's firing mechanism, left to rot in the open air. The Pokémon of Kalos have long since forgotten the war, but the land remembers. The soil is rich with sorrow. And what of the ultimate weapon itself? It was dismantled, its core hidden away, its blueprints scattered, but the technology did not disappear. It was studied, copied, repurposed. The echoes of that ancient Holocaust ripple through the region's history, influencing everything from the rise of powerful trainers to the strange energy anomalies that still occur in certain caves and ruins. The ultimate weapon's legacy is not a relic of the past. It is a sleeping giant, buried deep beneath modern Kalos, waiting for someone to wake it. Someone with the same grief, the same desperation, and the same willingness to sacrifice everything for a single moment of power. And when that day comes, the world will learn that some wars never truly end. They just wait for the next generation to repeat the same terrible mistake. The weapon's true purpose, its final secret, has yet to be unearthed. But the first stone has been overturned, and the bones are beginning to stir. The weapon fired, and 3,000 years of grief, rage, and impossible science were unleashed in a single pulse of light that swept across Kalos and beyond. AZ had already paid the price. His Floette returned to him. Yes, but the cost was a body that would not age, a heart that would not stop beating, and a soul that would wander the earth long after every friend and enemy had turned to dust. But the weapon did not simply end a war. It left a scar on the world itself, a scar that would not heal, and whose consequences would only be understood millennia later, in the age of trainers and gym battles and the quiet hum of Pokeballs. When the ultimate weapon detonated, it did not produce heat or blast in the ordinary sense. What it released was something far more fundamental, a wave of what we now call infinite energy. This was not fire or light or radiation as we know it. It was life force, harvested from thousands of fallen Pokémon, concentrated and then projected outward in a single desperate act of creation and destruction. And the very fabric of reality, the molecular structure of the Kalos region itself, was forever altered by that energy. Geologists in the modern day have puzzled over the strange crystalline formations that appear in caves and cliffs across the region. Formations that glow with an internal light. Formations that resonate with a frequency that seems to hum in time with a Pokemon's heartbeat. These are the Megastones, and they are not natural minerals. They are the physical remnants of that ancient detonation, the fossilized echoes of the infinite energy pulse that once washed over the land. Every megastone found anywhere in the world can trace its origin back to that single moment in Kalos, 3,000 years ago, when a weapon designed to resurrect a single Pokémon instead rewrote the rules of evolution itself. You see, the energy did not simply dissipate. It soaked into the ground, into the rocks, into the very bodies of the Pokémon that were exposed to it. Those survivors and their descendants began to change. Some developed an unstable, almost volatile potential, a latent power that could be unlocked by a trainer's bond and a special keystone. That potential is what we now call Mega Evolution. It is a rapid, temporary transformation that forces a Pokémon beyond its normal evolutionary limits, pushing its DNA into a state that would be impossible under natural conditions. And the catalyst for that transformation is always a stone born from that ancient weapon. But the effects were not limited to the battlefield or the geological record. The radiation of infinite energy seeped into the ecosystems of Kalos, and from there, into the global biosphere. Pokémon that lived near the impact site for generations developed a predisposition toward higher energy output, stronger territorial instincts, and in some cases, an unnerving sensitivity to human emotion. Researchers have documented that certain species in the Kalos region display unusual stress responses when exposed to artificial energy sources, as if they can still sense the echo of that terrible day. And the most sensitive of all, the ghost types that haunt the root of eternal night, the Abyssals that gather at the base of the Geosenj town cliffs, seem to know that something is buried beneath the earth, something that still pulses with a faint, dying light, that something is the weapon itself. After the war ended, after AZ vanished into legend, the weapon was dismantled and hidden, but it was not destroyed. The core of the device, the mechanism that controlled the release of infinite energy, was sealed away in a facility that no map would ever mark. A facility built by Lysandre Labs centuries later, when a man named Lysandre learned the truth of the weapon and became obsessed with its power. Lysandre did not discover the weapon by accident. He found it because he was looking. He had access to the ancient records of the Kalos royal family, the journals of scientists who had studied the weapon's aftermath, and the testimony of a few immortal beings who had witnessed the war firsthand. And he knew that somewhere, buried beneath the streets of Lumio City, was a bunker. A hidden laboratory where the weapon's trigger had been stored and studied, where the scientists of the Old Kingdom had tried and failed to re-engineer the device. That bunker still exists. It is a cold, sterile complex of concrete and steel, hidden behind a nondescript door in the basement of Lysandre Labs headquarters. Inside, you can still see the testing chambers, the reinforced observation windows, the rows of empty containment pods, and at the very end of the longest corridor, there is a room that contains a single pedestal. On that pedestal, there is a small, circular depression, a space that once held the key to the ultimate weapon's detonation sequence. That key has never been found. Some say AZ took it with him when he finally left Kalos. Others believe it was destroyed in the war, but Lysandre spent years searching for it, convinced that if he could just find that trigger, he could reclaim the weapon and use it to reshape the world according to his vision of beauty and order. He never found it. But the search itself tells us something profound about the weapon's legacy. It was not merely a tool of war. It was a technology that could be replicated if only the knowledge survived. And the knowledge did survive, buried in research notes, encoded in stone carvings, whispered in the legends of the ancient kings. The infinite energy that created the megastones, that warped the biology of entire species, that gave Aziz his immortality. That same energy could be harnessed again. The question is not whether the weapon can be rebuilt. The question is whether the trigger was ever truly lost, or whether it is waiting for someone to understand the pattern of the world that weapon reshaped. And that pattern leads us away from Kalos, across the sea, to a region where the very concept of truth and ideals was born from a different kind of power. A power that was also sealed away, also guarded by a king, and also capable of changing the world. The twin heroes of Unova are waiting to tell their story next. The previous chapter ended with a somber truth. The very stones used to fuel modern Pokémon battles are the crystallized remains of a Holocaust. The ultimate weapon, fired 3,000 years ago, did not just end a war, it scarred the world, embedding the life force of thousands of Pokémon into minerals, creating the mega stones that trainers now take for granted. That weapon was a product of human grief and ambition, a desperate act to resurrect a fallen friend. But as terrible as that story is, it is not the only ancient war that reshaped a region. It is not the only tale of a civilization that turned to a legendary creature for salvation, only to tear itself apart. Now we travel north across the sea to the Unova region, and here the mystery is not about radiation or a single blast. It is about an idea so powerful it split a dragon in two. Unova's history begins long before modern cities like Castelia or Nimbasa. The region's oldest surviving structure is the Dragon Spiral Tower, a massive stone spire that rises from the heart of a dense forest. It is not a castle or a fortress, it is a celestial anchor. The tower was built not to defend against invaders, but to watch the stars. Ancient Unovans, long before the Age of Kings, constructed this monument to track the movements of the heavens, to mark solstices and equinoxes, to measure time itself. But the tower also served another purpose. It was a prison or a shrine, depending on whom you ask. At the top of that tower, sealed within a chamber of swirling energy, slept a dragon. Not just any dragon, the original dragon, a being of such immense power that its very existence was a balancing act between two opposing forces, truth and ideals. The people of ancient Unova knew it as the hero that would one day unite their land. But they also knew that unity was fragile. The story goes that two brothers, twin heroes, once led the people of Unova. They used the power of the original dragon to build a kingdom, to bring peace and prosperity. But as the kingdom grew, so did the divide between the brothers. One brother believed that the world should be governed by truth, by facts, by history, by what is real and unchangeable. The other believed in ideals, in dreams in the future, in what could be, even if it had never been before. These were not petty disagreements. They were two entire philosophies of life, and the dragon could not choose between them. So the brothers fought, not with words but with armies. And the dragon, the very being that had unified them, was torn apart by their conflict. It split into two separate creatures, Reshiram, the embodiment of truth, whose fire burns away falsehood, and Zekrom, the embodiment of ideals, whose lightning forges a new path. The two dragons fled to opposite ends of the region, and the brothers went their separate ways. The kingdom fell into ruin. The Dragon Spiral Tower, once a place of celestial observation, became a monument to that ancient schism. The tower stands today, hollow and silent. Its upper floors are home only to wild Pokémon and the echoes of wind. But deep within its foundations, there is a hidden chamber, and in that chamber, there is no dragon, because the original dragon is gone. It was never truly destroyed. It was divided, and that is what makes it the most dangerous missing piece of lore in all of Unova, because if Reshiram and Zekrom were once one being, then it stands to reason that they could become one again. Some ancient texts speak of a vessel, a catalyst that could reunite them, a process that would restore the original dragon to its full, untamable power. But who would want that, and why? The answer lies in the very foundations of Unova's history. You see, the split did not just create two dragons. It created two bloodlines, two dynasties. One descended from the hero of truth, the other from the hero of ideals. And for centuries, those bloodlines have waited, each believing that their ancestors' philosophy was the correct one, that the other dragon, the other side of the original, must be subjugated or destroyed. The modern region of Unova is a place of contrasts. On the surface, it is a hub of technology and progress. But beneath that veneer, the old conflict still simmers. Team Plasma, the organization that rose to power in the recent era, was founded by a direct descendant of one of those ancient heroes. Their leader, Getsis, sought to control both dragons, to reunite them not through harmony, but through force. His goal was to become the absolute ruler of Unova. Wielding the complete power of the original dragon, he came terrifyingly close, and he only failed because a young trainer, a child with no lineage of truth or ideals, stood in his way. But the original dragon itself never returned. It remains a theoretical creature, a ghost in the lore. No Pokédex entry confirms its existence. No ancient text gives it a name, and that is precisely why it is so dangerous. Because if the original dragon were to ever be reformed, it would possess the combined might of Reshiram and Zekrom, plus something more, a third aspect perhaps, that the brothers never understood: the power of balance, the power of completion, a creature that could rewrite reality according to either truth or ideals, but with no other force to oppose it. The dragons, as we know them, are constrained by each other. Reshiram checks Zekrom, Zekrom checks Reshiram. Together, they represent the eternal debate between what is and what should be. But the original dragon would not be bound by debate. It would be an absolute. And in the wrong hands, that absolute could erase the very concept of choice. The Dragon Spiral Tower still stands, watching the stars, holding the memory of that lost unity. Some say that on certain nights, when the constellations align, just as they did when the tower was built, a faint light can be seen at the very top, a light that pulses in two colours, blue and orange. And if you listen closely, you can hear a sound. Not wind, not a Pokémon's cry. It is a hum, a low resonant hum, as if the tower itself is waiting for something, or someone. What that someone will do with the power of the original dragon is a question that has no answer yet, but the mystery is not gone. It is only sleeping, and in the ruins beneath another ancient structure in Unova, a different kind of secret lies buried. Not a dragon this time, but a language. A lost script carved into stone, waiting to be decoded. That is where we will go next, into the Abyssal Ruins. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The Dragon Spiral Tower stands as Unova's oldest known structure, its spiraling stones reaching toward a sky that once held a single dragon. But what if I told you that the true heart of Unova's ancient mystery lies not above the clouds, but beneath the waves, beneath miles of cold, crushing ocean water, far from the coast of Undella Town? There is a place no trainer can reach without a diving suit and a deep curiosity: the Abyssal Ruins. A labyrinth of submerged corridors and carved stone, hidden so completely that for centuries no human eyes saw it at all. You might ask yourself why anyone would build a structure at the bottom of the sea, and that question is the first clue in a puzzle that spans generations. When divers first explored the ruins, they discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about Unova's prehistoric past. The walls, the floss, the very corridors themselves are covered in a script no modern alphabet can translate. Not the ancient runes of the Regis chambers, not the unknown symbols of the Kalosian ruins, but something else entirely, a language of the deep. For years, researchers could make no sense of it. They photographed every panel, traced every groove, and fed the patterns into every database they had. Nothing matched. It was only when a linguist, half asleep in her study, realized the patterns repeated in cycles of 7, that the first breakthrough came. The script was not a written language in the conventional sense. It was a set of coded messages, each one a question and an answer, hidden in the arrangement of the stones themselves. Deciphering the coded messages on the floor of the Unovan Ocean became an obsession for a small team of scholars who had dedicated their lives to the ruins. They learned slowly that the carvings spoke of a being referred to only as the king, not a warlord, not a conqueror, but something far older and stranger. The king, the messages said, controls the tides. The king commands the ebb and flow of the ocean itself, and the king is sleeping. The carvings warned that if the king ever woke, the seas would rise and swallow the land whole. That is why the ruins were built. Not as a temple, not as a tomb, but as a cage. And that brings us to the mystery that haunts every diver who descends into the Abyssal Ruins. Are the Abyssal Ruins a sanctuary or a prison for a forgotten deity? The text on the walls is ambiguous. Some passages speak of honour and reverence, of offerings placed in stone altars along the corridor walls. But other passages, deeper in, describe seals and locks and the careful placement of stones to prevent the king from moving. The architecture itself tells a story. The corridors are narrow, almost claustrophobic, as if designed to trap something large. The central chamber, where the messages grow most urgent, is a dead end. There is no exit except the way you came in. It is a cell, built to hold something that breathes water and dreams of the surface. No one has ever seen the king. No Pokémon found in Unova matches the description in the carvings. The closest candidate, some say, is Kyogre, the primal embodiment of the sea itself. But Kyogre belongs to Hoenn, to the southern seas, and its mythology speaks of battles in the sky, not of kings imprisoned in the dark. Could the Abyssal Ruins be a remnant of a time when continents were connected, when Hoenn and Unova shared a shoreline? Or is the king something else entirely? A deity that the ancient Unovans feared so deeply, they sank its home into the ocean and wrote its name in a code they hoped no one would ever break. The coded messages are still being deciphered. Fragment by fragment, the story emerges. The king once ruled the waves, but its power was too great. It could raise storms, shatter cliffs, and drown cities with a thought. The ancient people of Unova, the same ones who raised the Dragon Spiral Tower to honor the Dragon of Truth and Ideals, turned against the king. They built the Abyssal Ruins as a prison, then flooded it, sealing the king beneath the weight of the entire sea. And they left behind a warning, carved in stone, for anyone who might one day find the ruins and be tempted to release what lies within. But here is the strangest part. The messages also contain a promise, a prophecy perhaps. They say that when the stars align in a certain pattern, when the moon pulls the tides to their highest off point in 1,000 years, the seals will weaken, the king will stir, and the ruins, once a sanctuary, will become a gateway. The question is not whether the king is real. The question is whether the ancient Unovans were right to imprison it, or whether they were simply afraid of the one being that could have saved them from something worse. We may never know the full truth. The Abyssal Ruins remain one of the most inaccessible locations in the known world, their secrets guarded by pressure and darkness and the patient silence of the deep. But every time a diver descends, every time a newly translated passage is published, the picture sharpens just a little, and one day, someone will reach the final chamber, read the final message, and understand what the king truly is. Until then, the ruins hold their breath beneath the Unovan Ocean, waiting. And elsewhere, in a region where the sky itself has holes torn into it, another mystery is stirring. A story of wormholes and alien life, of islands born from dimensional fractures. That story begins in Alola, where the boundaries between worlds are paper thin, and where something has already crossed over. From the depths of the Abyssal Ruins, where the ocean floor whispered of a king tied to the tides, we now travel across the world to a chain of islands where the sky itself is not a boundary but a door. The messages inscribed on those sunken stones spoke of cycles, of ebb and flow, of return and retreat. But what if the greatest cycle was not the pull of the moon on the sea, but the pull of something far more distant? What if there are places on this planet where the fabric of reality is stretched so thin that other dimensions can seep through like water through a cracked hull? That is the secret of the Alola region. Alola is not just a tropical paradise of gentle beaches and volcanic peaks. It is one of the rarest geological and metaphysical formations in the Pokémon world. A natural nexus where the barrier between our universe and others is dangerously fragile. Scientists and mythologists alike have long puzzled over why Alola experiences more interdimensional activity than any other region. The answer lies in what the ancient islanders called the thin places. These are not wormholes torn by some cataclysm, but rather permanent weaknesses in the membrane of reality, places where the veil between worlds has always been gossamer thin, and in Alola, those thin places are everywhere. The islands themselves are volcanic in origin, born from the collision of tectonic plates deep beneath the ocean. But that geology alone cannot explain the frequency of ultra-wormholes appearing above the shores of Melemele, the crater of Wella Volcano, or the silent expanse of the Lake of the Sun and Moon. Some researchers believe that the region sits atop an ancient fault line, not just in the Earth, but in space-time itself. The same forces that raised the mountains may have also strained the dimensional fabric, leaving lasting perforations. And when those perforations are disturbed by energy, by emotion, or by the simple passage of time, they open. These are the routes through which the Ultra Beasts first came, and they have been coming for a very long time. The term Ultra Beast is a modern classification coined by the Ether Foundation after the first well-documented breaches in the early days of modern Alolan history. But the phenomenon is ancient. Long before anyone had a name for them, the native people of Alola told stories of strange visitors from the sky, beings of pure energy, creatures that did not follow the rules of this world. They called them the Foreign Ones and treated them with a mixture of reverence and fear. Today we know them as Nihilego, Buzzwole, Pheromosa, Celesteela, Kartana, Guzzlord, Stakataka, and Blacephalon. Each one seems to be an invasive species, ripped from an ecosystem that operates on entirely different physical laws. That classification, invasive species, is more than a metaphor. The Ultra Beasts are not merely travelers. They are ecological disruptors. Their bodies are made of substances that do not exist naturally in our world, and their presence can warp the environment around them. Nihilego, for example, is a parasitic entity that injects a neurotoxin capable of altering the minds of its hosts. Buzzwole carries a virus that makes its muscles swell beyond natural limits. Guzzlord consumes everything in its path, leaving behind a barren waste. And yet these creatures are not evil. They are simply organisms from a different reality, following their own survival instincts. In their home dimension, they are likely ordinary, even balanced. Here, they are monsters, not because of malice, but because they are out of place. The Ether Foundation, under President Lusamine, attempted to study and contain the Ultra Beasts, but their efforts only scratched the surface of a much older story. The Ultra Wormholes are not random, they follow patterns, and one of the most dramatic patterns in Alolan history involves a being that is not an Ultra Beast, but something far older and far more powerful, Necrozma. Necrozma is known in legend as the Thief of Light. It is a creature from Ultra Space, but unlike the other denizens of that dimension, Necrozma did not just cross over accidentally, it came deliberately, and its arrival triggered an ancient catastrophe. Long before recorded history, when Alola was still a cluster of volcanic islands barely inhabited, the sky above the region darkened, the sun dimmed, the stars vanished. For generations, the people lived under a twilight that never lifted. They called this period the Blinding Night, and they believed it was caused by a being that had consumed the light of the world. That being was Necrozma. It is not a creature of flesh and blood, but of crystallized energy. Its body is a prism capable of absorbing, storing, and redirecting light. In its home dimension, it once shone like a star, but something happened. Perhaps a catastrophe in ultra space, perhaps an ancient conflict that left Necrozma broken and starving. It craved light, and it found a world full of it. When Necrozma descended upon Alola, it did not attack in the way a predator attacks prey. It simply opened its body and absorbed. It drank the daylight. It drained the moon. It pulled the glow from every living thing. The ocean lost its luminescence. The flowers closed and never opened. The people huddled in darkness, and the Pokémon became listless and weak. The Tapu Guardians, the island deities, struggled to push Necrozma back, but they could not defeat it alone. The story of how the Guardians eventually sealed Necrozma and restored light to Alola is a tale we will explore in a future chapter. For now, understand that Necrozma's presence left a scar on the dimensional fabric. Its passage created permanent fissures, making Alola even more susceptible to ultra wormholes in the ages that followed. So when we consider the mystery of Alola, we are not looking at a single event. We are looking at a long history of interdimensional contact. The thin places did not appear overnight. They were formed over millennia, opened and reopened by the comings and goings of beings from beyond. The Ultra Beasts are the current wave of that ancient tide, and Necrozma is the ancient echo that still reverberates through the islands. The coded messages in the Abyssal Ruins spoke of a king who returned with the tides. In Alola, the tides are not only made of water, they are made of light and shadow and the gap between worlds. And the king who returns, or the being that might one day return, has not yet finished its story. But there is another layer to this mystery, one that ties directly to the very protectors of the islands, the Guardians who have stood watch over the thin places since before Necrozma first dimmed the sun. What are these Guardians, and why did they choose to seal themselves away in sacred shrines rather than destroy the threats they faced? Those questions will take us deeper into the heart of Alolos's oldest secrets. The thin places in Alola are not just a curiosity of geography. They are a scar left by forces far older than any human settlement. You cannot understand the islands without understanding what lives in those fractures, what watches from the other side. And you cannot understand the trials that have shaped every generation of Alolan trainers without first confronting the blood that was spilled on these shores long before the first Kahuna ever stood trial. The Island Challenge, as it is known today, is a celebration of growth, a rite of passage where young trainers prove their bond with Pokémon across 4 islands. But its origins are steeped in something far less gentle. Before there were captains, before there were grand trials, there was only survival. The earliest people of Alola arrived on these islands, carrying their own fears and their own hopes, and they found a land that was already protected. The Tapu Guardians, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, and Tapu Fini did not invite these settlers. They tolerated them, and tolerance had to be earned. The brutal history of the Island Challenge begins not with the challenge itself, but with the trials that the first Kahunas faced. The role of the Kahuna is not merely ceremonial, it is a burden. Originally, the Kahunas were the ones who stood between the villages and the wild, between the people and the Guardians. They were warriors, mediators, and sometimes sacrifices. The first Kahunas did not earn their titles by defeating a single totem Pokémon. They earned them by surviving encounters that would break most people. They ventured into sacred territories where the Tapu themselves ruled unchallenged. They made offerings, they negotiated, they fought when negotiation failed. The trials today, the trials of strength, of endurance, of wisdom, are echoes of those original ordeals. The captains you meet are descendants of a lineage that once had to prove their worth with their lives. Every trial site on every island marks a place where a Kahuna once stood alone against something incomprehensible. The Zygarde cells, the totem Pokémon, the ritual dances, all of it is ritualized memory. It is a ceremony meant to remind each new generation that the land they walk on was paid for in pain. But why such severity? Because Alola has always been a threshold. The thin places that draw ultra wormholes are not recent phenomena. They have existed since before the islands rose from the sea, and the Tapu Guardians were born from that same fabric. They are not native to this dimension in the way that ordinary Pokémon are. They are guardians of a boundary, and they know better than anyone what waits on the other side. The first Ultra Beast invasion was not the one recorded in modern times. There was an older incursion, long before any human records, when the boundaries between worlds were still raw and unguarded. The Ultra Beasts that came through then were not the confused wanderers today. They were predators. They were colonizers. They saw Alola as an unclaimed world ripe for harvest, and the Tapu Guardians met them not with diplomacy, but with fire and fury. How the Tapu deities defended Alola from that first invasion is a story that survives only in fragments, carved into stone and woven into chants that the elders still sing in quiet voices. Tapu Koko, the guardian of Melamel, struck with lightning so fierce that it scarred the cliffs. Tapu Lele scattered scales of life-giving energy that healed the wounded, but also drove the invaders mad with overwhelming sensation. Tapu Bulu rooted the earth itself, turning the forests into walls of vengeful growth. And Tapu Fini created mist that erased not just visibility, but memory, confusing the Ultra Beasts until they could no longer find their way back to the wormholes they had come through. Together, they formed a defensive grid, unlike anything seen anywhere else in the Pokémon world. 4 points, 4 islands, 4 temples, the ruins of conflict on Melemele, the ruins of life on Akala, the ruins of abundance on Ulaula, and the ruins of hope on Pony. These ruins are not merely places of worship, they are anchor points. They are the physical manifestation of the Tapu's power, each one tuned to a specific frequency of the dimension they guard. When the Guardians stand within their ruins, they are stronger. More importantly, the ruins themselves act as a filter, smoothing the turbulence of the thin places, preventing random wormholes from tearing open in the middle of villages. You can still feel it if you visit those ruins. The air changes, the light bends differently, the stones hum with a vibration that is nearly imperceptible, but it is there. They are the reason Alola has not been overrun by Ultra Beasts 1,000 times over. They are the reason the Island Challenge exists as a structured test, rather than a constant war, because the Tapu knew that they could not guard every crack forever. They needed human allies. They needed kahunas who understood the signs, who could read the skies and the tides and the behavior of Pokémon, and who could call for help before the next breach became a catastrophe. That is the true legacy of the kahunas. They are the inheritors of a responsibility that stretches back to before recorded history. Every time a new kahuna is appointed, they undergo a private ceremony that no outsider ever witnesses. Some say they are taken to the ruins and shown visions of what the Tapu have seen. Others say they are given a shard of Ultra Beast's crystal, a token of the enemy that was turned back. The details are secret, but the weight is visible in their eyes. The trials in the games, the ones that seem like simple battles, are the sanitized version. The real Island Challenge, the one that existed for centuries before the modern league system arrived, was a gauntlet of survival. It involved weeks of isolation, fasting, and meditation on the slopes of dormant volcanoes. It involved facing wild Pokémon that were not held back by any code of conduct. And at the end, if the candidate proved worthy, they were brought before the Tapu themselves, not to fight but to stand, to be judged. And if they were judged unworthy, the history is silent on that part. But the ruins do not speak of mercy. The Tapu Guardians are not cruel, they are not malevolent, but they are ancient, and they are pragmatic. They see the short lives of humans as fleeting sparks, and they measure time in centuries. They have defended Alola from the first Ultra Beast invasion, and they will defend it from the next one, but they expect the kahunas to do their part. They expect the trials to be real. They expect the cycle of preparation to continue without interruption, because the thin places never heal. The scars in space are permanent. The Ultra Beasts are not invaders who can be defeated once and forgotten. They are a constant pressure, a tide that never stops rising. The Tapu hold the line, but they need hands in the world to sound the alarm, to guide the young, and to remind every generation that the peace they enjoy is a fragile thing. And as Alola sleeps under its warm stars, as the waves lap against the shores of Pony Island and the mist curls around the ruins of Hope, there is another story waiting in the cold north. A story of a meteor that fell not from another dimension, but from the dark between worlds. A story of a day that turned black, of a Pokémon that was not born but arrived, and of 2 wolves who stood against a catastrophe that nearly erased an entire region. That story will have to wait for another night. But if you think the Tapu are old, you have not yet heard of what slumbers beneath the Galar region, you have not yet seen the true meaning of the Darkest Day. From the moment we left Alola, the islands where the Tapu Guardians still watch over the thin places between worlds, it becomes clear that the Pokémon world has always been vulnerable to forces beyond its understanding. The Ultra Beasts came through natural wormholes, but there is another kind of catastrophe, one that falls from the sky without warning. And in the region of Galar, that catastrophe did not just arrive. It crashed into the earth, buried itself in the crust, and waited for thousands of years to wake up. Galar's history is built on a lie. The official stories told to children and tourists describe a noble age of kings, knights, and legendary Pokémon who saved the land from a great darkness. But the truth is far stranger, far older, and far more dangerous than any bedtime tale. The darkness did not come from a rival kingdom or a rogue Pokémon. It came from space, a meteor, not an ordinary rock, a vessel carrying a creature from beyond the stars. When it struck the ancient land that would become Galar, the impact did not just carve a crater, it cracked the very fabric of the region's geology. And more than that, it cracked the sky. For 3 days, the heavens above Galar collapsed into a toxic crimson haze. The sun vanished behind a swirl of purple and black. The ground split open, and from those fissures erupted a strange glowing energy that made Pokémon swell to monstrous size, lose all reason, and rampage across the countryside. This was the Darkest Day, and at the center of it all was Eternatus, the alien dragon that had ridden the meteor to this world. It was not a creature of earth or sea or sky. It was a parasite of energy, feeding on the very life force of the planet. As it woke beneath the surface, it began to leak a constant stream of cosmic radiation through the cracks it had made in the ground. Those cracks became what we now call the power spots, the nodes that allow Pokémon in Galar to undergo the phenomenon known as Dynamaxing. Every Dynamax battle you have ever seen in Galar is powered by the remains of an extraterrestrial dragon. The red glow that surrounds a Dynamax Pokémon is not natural. It is radiation left over from Eternatus' impact, still seeping through the earth thousands of years later. The power spots are not mystical wells of energy. They are wounds in the planetary crust, and the fluid seeping out is a slow bleed of cosmic poison. The people of that ancient age did not understand what was happening. They saw the sky tear open. They saw their Pokémon grow into towering monsters of rage, and they feared it was the end of the world. 2 kings rose to lead the fight. Their names have been mostly erased from history, but the legend says they wielded a sword and a shield that could cut through the darkness and block the corruption. Those weapons were not forged by human hands. They were living beings, Zacian and Zamazenta, the legendary heroes of Galar. Together with the 2 kings, they drove Eternatus back into the earth and sealed it away. But the sealing came at a cost. The truth of what had actually happened was too frightening to preserve. The kings ordered the records rewritten. The meteor was forgotten. Eternatus was reduced to a myth. The sword and shield became symbols of royalty, their true origins hidden behind ceremonial titles. The power spots were called gifts from the land, not cracks in a poisoned wound, and the Darkest Day was reframed as a glorious victory, not a brush with extinction. Generations passed. The 2 kings became faceless figures in stained glass. The sword and shield were locked away in vaults, their true names whispered only by historians who were dismissed as mad. Zacian and Zamazenta faded into folklore, their heroic deeds buried under layers of propaganda. The people of Galar forgot that they lived on top of a buried dragon. They forgot that every time they Dynamax a Pokémon, they are drawing power from an alien that once tried to consume their world. And Eternatus, it slumbered. It dreamed beneath the earth, its body still leaking that faint crimson glow through the power spots. It waited for the day when the seal would weaken, when the sky would crack open again. And when that day came, Galar would need more than stories. It would need the truth. But that truth is not only buried in the ground, it is also buried in the frozen wastes of the Crown Tundra. where the relics of a forgotten expedition still lie waiting to be uncovered, and where the next piece of this cosmic puzzle will reveal itself. The darkest day ended, but its shadow lingers across Galar in ways the modern monarchy never wanted you to see. The power spots still hum with Eternatus's radiation, and the legends of Zacian and Zamazenta have been polished into a tidy hero myth. But the crown tundra, that frozen expanse to the north, holds relics that the monarchy actively tried to erase, because the true story of Galar's past is not one of two wolves and a sword. It is the story of a forgotten king, a kingdom that vanished from the map, and a bond between humans and Pokémon that was systematically written out of history. Beneath the snow and ice of the crown tundra lie the ruins of a civilization that predates even the darkest day. This was the domain of Calyrex, the king of bounties, a Pokémon of immense psychic power who once ruled over both humans and Pokémon in a symbiotic relationship. The old texts, what few survive, describe Calyrex as a benevolent sovereign who could control the weather, command the land to yield crops, and heal the sick with a touch. But here is the detail the monarchy feared most. Calyrex did not rule alone. It ruled alongside human kings and queens, a partnership of equal standing. The bond between Calyrex and the people of its kingdom was not one of worship or servitude. It was a covenant of mutual survival. The crown tundra was once a thriving, temperate paradise, thanks to Calyrex's power. The ruins of Freezington, the old shrine at the Crown Shrine, the ancient tombs. These are not remnants of a primitive culture. They are the bones of a sophisticated society that understood the true nature of the bond between human and Pokémon. But the monarchy of modern Galar, the lineage that rose to power after the darkest day, had no interest in a rival king, even a legendary one. So they erased it. They rewrote the history books. They tore down the old temples and built new ones dedicated to the heroes who stopped Eternatus. They turned Calyrex into a fairy tale, a story for children, a legend that had no place in the official record. The king of bounties was buried, not literally, but culturally, and the kingdom was forgotten. But the land itself remembers. Deep in the crown tundra, far from the tourist trails and the tidy museum exhibits, lies the Split Decision ruins. This place is a monument to a different kind of mystery, one that has nothing to do with kings or covenants, and everything to do with the raw, primal forces of the Pokémon world. The ruins are not Galarian, they are older. They predate even Calyrex's kingdom, and they contain two sealed chambers. One holds Regieleki, the embodiment of pure electric energy. The other holds Regidrago, a being of crystallized dragon essence. According to the ancient carvings, the builders of the ruins faced an impossible choice. Which of these two titans would they awaken to protect the land? They could not decide, so they sealed both, leaving the decision to some future generation. But here is the unsettling detail. The ruins themselves are a trap. The very structure was designed to ensure that whoever opens them must make a sacrifice. The key to unlocking the chambers is not a physical artifact. It is the trainer's own essence, their very life force. The old builders understood that power demands a price, and when you finally stand before the sealed door, you are forced to choose between two forms of annihilation: limitless lightning or infinite draconic fury. The mystery of Regieleki and Regidrago is not about which one is stronger. It is about why a civilization would build a vault to contain such destructive power in the first place. The answer may lie in the same forgotten history that erased Calyrex, because the Split Decision ruins were built by a people who had witnessed the darkest day. They saw what happened when an entity like Eternatus fell from the sky. They knew that power unchecked, whether from a meteor, a king, or a legendary, could tear the region apart. So they built a failsafe, a prison for two forces that, if unleashed, could rival even the ancient dragon. And then they walked away, leaving the choice to someone else. The Galarian monarchy, in its systematic rewriting of history, could not erase the ruins. They were too massive, too ancient, too tied to the land itself. So they did the next best thing. They ignored them. They left them off the maps, omitted them from school lessons, and let the snow cover the entrances. The truth of the split-decision ruins, like the truth of Calyrex, became a whisper carried only by those who still remembered the old songs. But the whispers are growing louder. Researchers, treasure hunters, and trainers drawn by restless curiosity have begun to find the old paths. They have started to ask why the monarchy is so eager to control the narrative of Galar's past. And what they are finding in the frozen tombs of the Crown Tundra suggests that the history we were taught is not just incomplete, it is a deliberate construction, designed to hide a bond that was once the foundation of all life in this region. Calyrex waits still, its spirit bound to the land it once tended. The King of Bounties does not want revenge. It wants the bond restored. It wants humans to remember that they once shared a throne with a Pokémon. And if the monarchy could not bear to let that truth survive, then perhaps the truth is more dangerous than any legend. As you stand on the edge of the Crown Tundra, looking south toward the modern cities of Galar, you can almost feel the weight of what was lost. But the deepest secrets are not in the frozen north. They lie far to the south, in a crater that was old before Calyrex's kingdom ever rose. A crater so vast, so deep, that even the Galarian monarchy had no power to hide it. The land of Paldea holds a scar that tells a story older than any monarchy, older than any war, older than the Darkest Day itself. And in the depths of that crater, something waits. Something that has been waiting for 1,000,000 years. From the frozen relics of the Crown Tundra, we now turn south to a place that is not a kingdom of ice, but a scar in the earth itself. There is a wound in the land of Paldea so deep that it defies every natural law we understand. The great crater of Paldea is not just a hole in the ground. It is a biological anomaly where time itself appears to have folded. Imagine a chasm more than 2,000 meters deep, its walls lined with crystalline formations that pulse with an inner light. The crater formed approximately 1,000,000 years ago, but its origins remain debated. Some say a meteorite struck the ancient Paldean continent. Others whisper that the impact was not a rock from space, but something far stranger, a tear in the fabric of reality itself. Whatever the cause, the crater has remained sealed off for most of history, a forbidden zone where the usual rules of nature break down. It was only about 200 years ago that an expedition led by a man named Heath finally reached the bottom. Heath was a scientist and explorer for the Paldean government, and his journal entries describe a world unlike anything above ground. The deeper he descended, the more the air shimmered with a strange energy. The crystals lining the cavern walls grew larger, and they seemed to watch him. Heath recorded that the crystals responded to the thoughts of his team, flickering and changing colour based on their emotions. He called them terrestrial crystals, after an ancient word for Earth star, and he was the first to document the phenomenon that would later become known as terrestrialization. But Heath's most disturbing discovery was not the crystals themselves, it was what lived among them. He claimed to have encountered a being that he could not fully describe, a serpentine creature that seemed to exist in multiple moments at once. He called it a hidden treasure of Area Zero, and noted that its very presence caused time to stutter. This encounter led to the mystery of the third legendary, a Pokémon that has never been officially catalogued in any modern Pokédex. It is said to be the source of the terrestrial phenomenon, a force that allows Pokémon to transform into a crystalline form and change their type. But the true nature of that entity remains buried in the deepest chamber of the crater. The crystals themselves are not inert minerals. They are sentient, reactive to human thought in ways that defy physics. Researchers at the Naranja and Uva academies have found that the terrestrial energy stored in the crystals can be influenced by the intentions of a trainer. A calm mind produces clear, stable crystals. Fear or aggression causes them to fracture and pulse with erratic light. This suggests a feedback loop between consciousness and the geological environment, a strange symbiosis that has no parallel anywhere else in the Pokémon world. And then there is the most perplexing detail. the biological anomaly. In the deepest parts of Area Zero, the evolutionary timeline appears to break. Creatures that should have gone extinct millions of years ago still roam the caverns. Pokémon that resemble ancient fossils live alongside forms that seem to have come from a future that has not yet happened. Time itself appears to have folded within the crater, creating a pocket where past and present coexist. This is not a metaphor. The fossil records above ground tell one story. The living ecosystem of Area Zero tells another. The crystals may be the key. If they are sentient and reactive to thought, perhaps they are also reactive to time, able to store and replay moments from different eras. The third legendary might be the Source, a being that exists outside of linear chronology, its presence causing the temporal distortion that warps the crater's ecology. This is the central mystery that Paldea's greatest minds have yet to solve. What we do know is that the Great Crater of Paldea is not a mere landmark. It is a living question mark, a place where the rules of biology, time and consciousness blur into something unrecognizable. And from this folded time, something else has emerged. Creatures that should not exist, that defy the natural order of evolution. These are the paradox species, and their story is the one we will uncover next. The Great Crater of Paldea is a wound in the earth that has never healed, a place where biology breaks its own rules. But the deeper mystery is not the crater itself. It is what was found at its bottom. 200 years ago, an explorer named Heath led an expedition into that abyss. He came back with a journal that would become known as the Scarlet Book or the Violet Book, depending on which version of history you hold. And that book contains a record of things that should not exist. Heath did not just discover a new species or two. He described creatures that seemed to belong to different ages, different worlds. Some looked like ancient ancestors of modern Pokémon, Primal and Savage. Others appeared as sleek, metallic, almost machine-like beings, as if plucked from a distant future. And here is where the paradox begins. Those two categories, the ancient and the futuristic, are mutually exclusive. They cannot coexist in the same timeline. If the ancient forms truly came from the past, then the future forms have no place in the same ecosystem. If the future forms are real, then the past forms are anachronisms. Yet Heath's journal presents them side by side, as if time itself had folded into a single layer and laid them all out for him to see. But there is an even stranger possibility. What if Heath was not seeing the past or the future at all? What if his expedition stumbled into something far stranger, a kind of living imagination? The theory that paradox Pokémon are not time travelers, but creatures born from human thought, from story and memory and fear, has been whispered among scholars for years. Consider the names. The ancient ones are called the Great Variants, derived from old Paldean folklore. The futuristic ones are called Iron Variants, suggesting machine and cold logic. But those names were given by the people who first saw them, not by the creatures themselves. What if the crater's unique energy, the terrestrial phenomenon, does not merely draw power from some crystal, but reflects the minds of those who enter? What if it manifests whatever the observer expects to see? Heath's own account is careful. He never claims to have travelled through time. He only says he descended into a place where the air felt thick, where colours shifted in ways he could not explain, and where the Pokémon he encountered seemed to come from dreams. And yet his book is treated as a scientific record. The region's professors built entire theories around it. But the deeper you read, the more you realise the book is a document of impossibilities. It is a record of things that should not exist, written by a man who did not understand what he was seeing. And then there is the impossibility that most directly breaks our understanding of cause and effect. The Scream variants and the Iron variants. These are not just different categories, they are contradictions. A Scream tail, for example, looks like an ancient version of Jigglypuff, covered in fur and fangs, primitive and wild. But an Iron bundle is a robotic Delibird, sleek and manufactured. How can both exist in the same geological layer, the same cave system, unless time itself is not a line but a circle? or unless the entire concept of past and future is irrelevant inside that crater. The only consistency is inconsistency. Heath's final entries are fragmented. He writes about a light that made him forget, about a shape that moved just at the edge of vision. He closed his journal and never fully returned to the crater. The book itself was suppressed for decades, considered the work of a madman. But then, 200 years later, those creatures began appearing again, and they matched his descriptions exactly. The modern world of Paldea now faces a question that cannot be answered by science. Are we looking at a window into other times, or into our own collective subconscious? And if the latter, what does it say about us? That our deepest imagination is full of both primitive beasts and cold, unfeeling machines. The crater holds the key, but the lock is buried in the human mind. And as we pull back from the edge of that abyss, we turn our attention to another set of relics, locked away in shrines across the same region. They were sealed for a reason, by ancient kings who feared what would happen if they were ever released. That story, the story of the treasures of ruin, is waiting just ahead. The impossibility of the paradox species, the anachronisms that should not exist in the same timeline, leaves us with a lingering unease. If those creatures are echoes of past and future, then what else might be sleeping in the shadows of Paldea's history? The great crater holds one kind of secret. But the ancient empire that once ruled these lands left behind something far more personal, far more deliberate. Something that was not born from time or space, but from the darkest corners of the human heart. Long before the modern league, before the cities of Messagoza and the Great Academy, Paldea was home to a powerful empire. We know almost nothing of its name or its rulers. What remains are not monuments or chronicles, but 4 artifacts, buried in shrines scattered across the region. Artifacts that are not treasures in any traditional sense. They are cursed objects, forged in malice, sealed away by a desperate king, and the stories surrounding them are not myths. They are warnings. The treasures of ruin, as they are now called, are a set of 4 vessels, each one corrupted by the concentrated hatred of a dying civilization. The empire that created them fell not from invasion or natural disaster, but from within. Its own people, driven by greed, envy, and fear, poured their darkest emotions into these objects, hoping to gain power, protection, or revenge. But the malice they channeled was too great. It consumed them. The artifacts became living embodiments of human wickedness, and they did not stop until the empire was nothing but ash and silence. The king who survived that collapse understood that these objects could never be destroyed. Malice does not vanish, it can only be contained. So he ordered the construction of 4 shrines, one for each artifact, deep in the wilderness where no civilization would rise again. He sealed them away, not with locks or guards, but with a pact of binding, a ritual that would keep them dormant as long as no one disturbed their resting places. And for centuries they slept. But the empire is gone, and the memory of its fall has faded into legend. The shrines remain, scattered across Paldea, their purpose forgotten by all but a few scholars, and the treasures inside them have begun to stir. The first of these treasures is known as Woe-Cheen. It takes the form of an ancient scroll, covered in verses, written in a language that predates the modern Paldean alphabet. But the scroll is no simple text. It is a vessel for resentment, for the bitterness of those who felt their voices were never heard. Woe-Cheen does not speak, it writes. It inscribes curses into the minds of anyone who reads its words, slowly draining their will, their hope, their very life force. Those who have uncovered its shrine speak of a deep, oppressive weight in the air, as if the forest itself is mourning. The second treasure is Qianpao, a sword but not the kind forged for battle. This blade was never meant to be wielded. It is a shard of pure hatred, tempered by the jealousy of those who coveted what others had. Qianpao radiates a cold so absolute that it freezes the very air around it. The shrine that holds it lies on a mountain peak, and even in summer, the ground is covered in frost that never melts. Those who come near reports, seeing their breath turn to ice crystals, and hearing the faint sound of a blade being drawn, even when no one is there. The third is Ting Lu, a vessel shaped like an ancient ritual bowl, carved from stone and filled with the ashes of 1,000 burnt offerings. But the ashes are not from incense or sacrifices. They are the remnants of broken promises, of trust betrayed. Ting Lu feeds on fear, the fear of being abandoned, of being forgotten. Its shrine is a sunken ruin, half submerged in a marsh, and the waters around it are always still, always black. No birds sing near Ting Lu, no fish swim in its pond. It is a place of absolute silence, where the only sound is the slow drip of water, like a clock counting down. And the fourth is Chi Yu, a set of beads, each one carved from a tooth or a claw, strung together on a cord that glows with a heat that does not burn the skin but sears the soul. Chi Yu is the embodiment of pure greed, the desire to possess everything and give nothing. Its shrine is hidden within a volcanic crater, where the heat of the earth seems to pulse in rhythm with the beads. Those who have touched it, and there have been a few, reckless explorers, describe a burning sensation that does not come from fire, but from envy. The need to take what is not yours, to hoard, to consume, until there is nothing left. These 4 treasures were sealed, because they are not merely objects, they are entities. They think, they feel, and they remember. Woxin, Qianpao, Ting Lu, and Chi Yu are manifestations of human malice given form and purpose. They do not need to be unleashed to cause harm. Their mere existence, their proximity to the world, is enough to corrupt the land around them. The shrines were built to contain that corruption. But containment is not a permanent solution. Over the centuries, the seal has weakened. The treasures have begun to whisper again, calling out to anyone who might listen. And what happens when they are fully awakened? The empire that created them was destroyed in a matter of years. The king who sealed them knew that they could not be defeated, only delayed. He hoped that time would heal the wounds of his people, that future generations would be wise enough to leave the artifacts undisturbed. But time does not heal malice, it only ferments it. Today the shrines still stand, but they are no longer hidden. They are known to the Pokémon League, to researchers, to treasure hunters who seek power at any cost. There are rumors of a group, calling themselves the Ruin Explorers, who believe the treasures can be controlled, used to establish a new empire. They are wrong. The treasures do not serve anyone. They consume their masters. And once they are free, there is no second sealing. The king who built the shrines was the last person to perform the ritual, and its knowledge died with him. So the treasures of ruin remain waiting. They are the ghost of a fallen empire, the embodiment of every dark thought that humanity has ever tried to bury. And they are patient, because malice, unlike empires, never truly dies. From the cursed artifacts of Paldea, we turn our gaze north, across the sea, to the region of Johto, where 2 towers once stood as symbols of hope and renewal, but one of them burned to the ground, and from its ashes rose a legend that has never been fully understood. The story of the Johto Towers and the phoenix that made its nest there is not one of malice, but of loss, and of the fragile balance between life and death. That is the mystery we will explore next. The 4 cursed treasures of Paldea were not merely artifacts of malice. They were monuments to human failure, forged from the darkest emotions of a dying empire. But as we move from the land of Paldea northward, across the sea, into the heart of Johto, we encounter a very different kind of ruin, one that begins not with a curse, but with a tragedy, and ends with a resurrection. Here, in the ancient city of Ecruteak, 2 towers once stood side by side, and their story is one of the strangest and most misunderstood events in Pokémon history. This is the tale of the Bell Tower and the Brass Tower, a tale of 2 birds and a sudden fire. Long before the modern era, before the gyms and the leagues, Ecruteak was a place where the veil between the mortal world and the legendary was thin. The people built 2 towering structures, not as fortresses, but as beacons. The Bell Tower, gleaming with brass and bronze, was dedicated to the sky, to the creatures of the wind and fire. The Brass Tower, darker and more grounded, was its counterpart, a home for the earthbound and the nocturnal, and for centuries they stood as a testament to balance. Upon these towers 2 great birds made their nests. One was Lugia, the guardian of the seas, whose wings could stir storms, whose cry could shake the earth. It roosted atop the brass tower, ruling the night. The other was Ho-Oh, the phoenix of rainbow wings, whose flight brought life and colour to the land. It claimed the bell tower, a spirit of day and renewal. They were not rivals, but poles of the same axis, each overseeing a half of the world. But then came the fire. No one knows exactly how it started. Some say it was a lightning strike during a great storm. Others whisper of a human mistake, a torch dropped in a moment of carelessness. But what we do know is that one night the brass tower burned. The flames consumed the dark wood and iron, climbing higher and higher, reaching toward the nest of Lugia. The bird fled, escaping into the ocean depths, and would not return to Johto for centuries. The tower was reduced to a charred shell. But the tragedy did not end with the loss of a single tower. Inside the burning building, there were other lives. 3 Pokémon, small, unnamed and unremarkable, had made their home in the lower floors of the brass tower. Perhaps they were sheltering from the rain. Perhaps they were lost. We have no record of their species, no memory of their names, only that they were 3 innocent souls caught in the inferno. They perished in the flames. And this is where the story shifts from tragedy to myth. Ho-Oh, the phoenix of the bell tower, saw what had happened. It descended through the smoke and ash, and it did something that had never been done before. With a single radiant feather, Ho-Oh brought those 3 dead Pokémon back to life. But resurrection is never simple. The fire had changed them, and so did Ho-Oh's power. They were not reborn as the humble creatures they had been. They were remade as something far greater. From the embers of the brass tower, 3 legendary beasts arose. One, born from a small timid creature, became a great cat of lightning, its fur crackling with electricity, its roar like thunder across the plains. That was Raikou. Another, once perhaps a fire type itself, became Entei, a volcano incarnate, its mane blazing with the very force that had consumed the tower. And the third, the most elusive, became Suicune, a creature of pure water, born from the tears of the rain that tried to quench the flames. They are the legendary beasts, the trio of Johto, and they are the living memory of that terrible night. This is the origin of the 3 nameless Pokémon who perished in the flames, and the story of how Ho-Oh used its resurrection power to transform death into legend. But why would a phoenix, a being of eternal life, intervene for 3 insignificant souls? The answer lies in the nature of the towers themselves. They were not just roosts, they were shrines, symbols of the bond between humans and the forces of nature. Ho-Oh was not just saving 3 lives, it was repairing a broken covenant. Yet this act of resurrection created a paradox. The legendary beasts are not merely revived Pokémon, they are symbols of the very elements that define the fire and the aftermath. They roam the earth forever, never settling, always running, because they are the embodiment of an event that can never be undone. And Ho-Oh, watching from its rebuilt bell tower, remains the keeper of that secret. Now the story of the towers and the phoenix leads us to an even deeper mystery, one that ties Johto to a land far to the north, a place where the threads of creation itself were woven into the earth. That mystery is the Sinjoh ruins, a site where the legend of Ho-Oh and the legendary beasts intersects with the very origins of the Pokémon universe. But that is a tale for another night, and the next chapter of our journey will take us there. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The story of the bell tower and the brass tower leaves us with a question that echoes across Johto's misty valleys. What happened to the 3 nameless Pokémon that perished in the flames? Their tragedy gave rise to a legendary phoenix, but it also planted a seed of something deeper, something that ties Johto not just to its own past, but to a region far to the north separated by an ocean and centuries of cultural drift. That connection is the Sinjoh ruins. High in the mountains of northern Johto, where the air turns thin and the forests give way to ancient stone, stands a structure that should not exist. The Sinjoh ruins are not built in the style of Ecratique's towers. They are not carved with the same symbols found in the ruins of Alph. Instead, they bear the unmistakable architectural language of Sinnoh, a region on another continent entirely. Pillars shaped like the spires of Mount Coronet, walls etched with the same patterns that adorn the spear pillar, and at the heart of this complex, a circular courtyard paved with a mosaic of glowing stones arranged in a spiral that mirrors the cosmic patterns found in the ruins of Celestic Town. This is the mystery stage, a place where the myths of two regions converge into a single, impossible truth. The link between Johto's culture and Sinnoh's creation myths is not metaphorical, it is literal. The people who built the Sinjoh ruins understood something that modern scholars have only recently begun to piece together. The same divine force that shaped Sinnoh's mountains also breathed life into Johto's legends. Let us walk through the ritual that takes place here. It is not a ceremony performed by priests or sages. It is a summoning, a channeling of cosmic energy that draws directly from the source of all existence in the Pokémon world. On the mystery stage, if you possess a specific artifact, the adamant crystal, the lustrous globe, or the Grisius core, and you stand at the center of that spiral of stones, something unprecedented happens. The stage begins to glow. The air thickens with a pressure older than any recorded history. And then, in a flash of light that seems to bend time itself, a being emerges. Not Dialga, not Palkia, not Giratina. The entity that appears is the creator of all three. Arceus itself, the alpha Pokémon, steps into reality from a rift in space that opens directly above the stage. This is not a legend passed down through generations. This is a witnessed event. You, the viewer, the player, the explorer of this world, can stand on that ancient platform and watch a god being born. Not from an egg, not from a long-forgotten nebula, but from the raw fabric of creation, right there in front of you. Why would such a ritual exist in Johto, a region thousands of miles from Sinnoh's Mount Coronet? The answer lies in the shared spiritual DNA of both cultures. The ancient Johtonians did not merely borrow ideas from their Sinnohan neighbours. They were the same people, or at least, they were connected by a deeper bond that predates the separation of continents. The Sinjoh ruins are a testament to a forgotten age of unity, when the concept of regional boundaries did not exist because the world was still being shaped. The same hands that carved the spear pillar also placed these stones. The same prayers that echoed across the slopes of Mount Coronet were whispered here, in the cold mountain air of Johto. This explains why the architecture of the Sinjoh ruins feels so familiar to anyone who has explored the depths of Sinnoh's ancient sites. The pillars are not just similar, they are identical in proportion and layout. The spiral mosaic is a direct copy of the one found at the base of Mount Coronet's peak. Even the name Sinjoh itself hints at this hybrid identity, a portmanteau of Sinnoh and Johto, as if the two regions were always meant to be understood as two halves of a single story. But the most profound implication of the mystery stage is not its architectural coherence. It is what the ritual reveals about the nature of Arceus itself. If you can summon the creator deity in a remote corner of Johto, then the god is not bound to one location. It exists everywhere, always at every moment. The ritual does not bring Arceus to you from somewhere else. It simply opens a window, a moment of alignment, where the barrier between dimensions grows thin enough for a glimpse of the original light. That light is the same one that shone when the universe was born, and it has never dimmed. Now consider the implications for the three nameless Pokémon who died in the Brass Tower fire. Their souls ascended to become the legendary beasts. But where did they go after that transformation? The answer may lie not in Johto, but in the shadow of another ancient calamity, one that involved a people who devoted their lives to preserving the memory of dragons. The Draconid people and their Lorekeeper hold the next piece of this puzzle. Their story is a bridge between the fire of the brass tower and the echoes of a war that reshaped a continent. And when we follow that trail, we will find ourselves standing on the edge of something far older than any tower or ruin. A truth that has been waiting for us to listen. The journey from the Sinjoh ruins leaves us with a lingering question. If a god can be born before our eyes, what else might be hiding in the forgotten corners of the world, waiting to be awakened? It's a question that pulls us south to the Hoenn region, where a people known as the Draconid once watched over a secret so dangerous it could rewrite history itself. The Draconid people were not merely a tribe of dragon tamers. They were the keepers of a truth buried deep within the caverns of Meteor Falls. The falls themselves are a series of cascading waterfalls and twisting tunnels carved into a mountain. But long before the modern world found its way there, the Draconid understood that this place held the key to a power that had been lost for millennia. It was here, they said, that the first mega evolution occurred. Mega evolution, as most trainers know it today, is a phenomenon where a Pokémon and its trainer share a bond so powerful that it unlocks a temporary transformation, a surge of energy that reshapes the creature's very biology. But the Draconid knew a different story. They believed that mega evolution was not discovered by modern science. It was a gift from the sky, born from a cosmic event that nearly destroyed everything. The legend speaks of a meteorite, a fragment of the heavens that crashed into the earth and shattered, scattering its essence across the region. That meteorite carried an energy that could either heal or annihilate. The Draconid people, under the guidance of their Lorekeeper, made it their sacred duty to protect the remaining fragments and to ensure that the knowledge of how to harness that power never fell into the wrong hands. They built their civilization around the very heart of that impact site, deep within Meteor Falls, and they trained with the dragon types that shared their affinity for the sky. The first mega evolution was not a triumph, it was a desperate act. When the meteor struck, the land itself rebelled. Primal forces, the ancient Groudon and Kyogre, awakened and clashed in a battle that tore the continent apart. The only creature capable of stopping them was Rayquaza, the Sky Dragon, but even it could not face both at once without help. The Draconid Lorekeeper of that time, a woman whose name has been lost to the ages, performed a ritual. Using the meteor's energy, she and her Salamence achieved the first mega evolution, fusing their bond with the celestial power to create a weapon of pure destruction. That power allowed them to drive Rayquaza into a rage so immense that it finally quelled the primal titans. But the cost was immense. The Lorekeeper vanished, and the meteor's energy was sealed away in the form of the Keystone and Megastones scattered across Hoenn, centuries past. The Draconid people dwindled, their numbers thinning as the world forgot their story. But one Lorekeeper remained, a young woman named Zinnia. She inherited the burden of her ancestors, and she alone understood that the prophecy was not a myth. It was a countdown. The meteor that had gifted them mega evolution was only a fragment of something far larger. A second meteor, much bigger, was on a collision course with the planet, and this time, there was no ancient dragon to save them. Zinnia's mission was not to prevent the meteor from falling, but to redirect its destruction. She believed that the only way to survive was to awaken Rayquaza once more, and, using the power of Mega Evolution, launch an attack so precise that it would shatter the asteroid before it could devastate the world. But she knew that the modern scientific community, represented by the Devon Corporation and the Moss Deep Space Center, would try to stop the meteor with technology. She saw their plan as a delusion. Science could not comprehend the ancient prophecy. Only myth could answer myth. This is where the Delta episode begins. The line between science and myth blurs in the vacuum of space. The player, a trainer from the Hoenn region, is drawn into Zinnia's world. She steals the keystone and the meteorite fragment. She battles the player. She even destroys the device that the scientists built to destroy the asteroid. Why? because she knows that if they fire their weapon, they will only create more fragments, more destruction. She believes that the only true solution is to let Rayquaza absorb the meteor's energy, to use the very thing that once nearly killed the world as its salvation. And she is right. In the end, the player and Zinnia ascend to the top of Sky Pillar, a tower that mirrors the sacred spaces of Johto and Sinnoh. They summon Rayquaza, they perform the ritual, and they watch as the dragon soars into the sky, turning into a streak of emerald light. The meteor is destroyed not by force, but by transformation. Rayquaza mega evolves in the upper atmosphere, and the debris burns harmlessly in the sky. But the cost of Zinnia's victory is silence. She understands that the world cannot know the truth, that the secret of the Draconid must remain hidden, that the prophecy will one day be needed again. She disappears, leaving only a whisper of her existence behind. What Zinnia did was not just a scientific anomaly. It was a testament to the idea that some dangers are too old for logic, and that the line between myth and reality is thinner than we think. The Draconid people were erased from most historical records, but their story echoes every time a trainer pushes their bond with a Pokémon to its limit, every time a key stone glows with the light of a fallen star. And yet, even as we close the chapter on Hoenn's hidden prophecy, another question rises from the depths of history. If a meteor can grant evolution, what else can a man-made object create? What happens when a civilization decides to forge its own gods, to build power not from the sky but from the earth, from technology, from a desperation that outruns wisdom? The answer is waiting in a place where the boundary between creation and destruction is measured in volts, in steel, in the cold light of a laboratory. The story of artificial gods is about to begin. From the Draconid people, we learn that the world almost ended, twice, by a meteor that should have been unstoppable. Their solution was ancient and natural, a bond between human and dragon, channeled through a keystone and a megastone, calling down Rayquaza to burn the threat from the sky. That is the old way. But what happens when humanity decides to build its own solution? What happens when we refuse to rely on nature, on prophecy, on the whims of legendaries, and instead craft a god with our own hands? The answer to that question is scattered across several regions, each a monument to the same dangerous ambition. Kanto gave us the first, and perhaps the most infamous example. On Cinnabar Island, hidden beneath the mansion of a long-dead scientist, a team of researchers dedicated themselves to a project that blurred every ethical line they could find. They had obtained a fossilized eyelash, a single cell from the most elusive Pokémon ever recorded, Mew, and they decided to clone it. The creature that emerged from that cloning tube was not Mew. It was something stronger, faster, more intelligent, and far more unstable. They called it Mewtwo. From the moment of its creation, Mewtwo was treated as a weapon. Its mind was conditioned for combat, its psychic powers amplified to a degree that terrified even its creators. And yet the science never stopped to ask whether it had a soul, whether it deserved a choice. The records from Cinnabar Island are fragmentary, but they tell us that Mewtwo eventually broke free, destroying the laboratory and everyone inside. It fled to a remote cave, alone, angry, and profoundly aware of the injustice of its existence. The ethics of that experiment are still debated among lore historians today. Did the scientists have the right to create a life form solely for battle? Was it ever possible to control something with that level of power? Mewtwo itself later found a kind of peace in the wilderness, but the question it raised never faded. If humanity can manufacture a god, what responsibility do we bear for the consequences? Years later, in a different region, that same ambition resurfaced in a more systematic form. The Ether Foundation, an organization ostensibly dedicated to the protection of Pokémon, launched a secret project known as the RKS system. The goal was audacious: to synthesize a being that could match or surpass the power of Arceus, the original creator. They called the prototype type Null, but type Null was not a god, it was a cage. The scientists fitted it with a heavy restraining mask, the control mask, designed to suppress its immense power and keep it submissive. The mask caused constant pain. The creature could not evolve, could not express its true nature, because the very technology meant to control it was also torturing it. Type. Soul was a failed attempt to build a living weapon, and its failure was not in its power, but in its suffering. It was only when the mask was removed, when it was finally allowed to become silverly, that the RKS system truly activated. But by then, the original purpose had already been corrupted by cruelty. These two experiments share a dark thread. The belief that if you cannot find a god, you can build one, and the belief that you can then control it. Yet there is a third story, one that predates both of them by centuries, and it is perhaps the most mysterious of all. In the region of Kalos, over 500 years ago, a brilliant inventor named Nikola created a masterpiece of mechanical engineering. It was a small clockwork Pokémon built from steel and brass and an intricate gear system. He called it Morgana. But what set Morgana apart from any other automaton was the soul heart. This was a device implanted into its chest that could absorb life energy from the surrounding environment, converting it into power. In essence, Nikola had given a machine a soul. Morgana was intended as a gift for a princess, and it served her faithfully for many years. It had emotions, it could think, it could love. It was by every definition alive. The technology behind the soul heart has never been replicated. The knowledge was lost when Nikola died, and all that remains are scattered blueprints and the sole surviving Morgana, which today is considered a mythical Pokémon. So rare and so advanced that it blurs the line between artificial and natural. What makes Morgana so haunting is not its power, but its purpose. It was not built as a weapon, it was built as a companion. It represents a fundamentally different approach to the creation of life, not to control or dominate, but to give. And yet, even that act was not without its own ethical shadow. The soul heart absorbs life force from other beings. Every time Morgana uses its signature move, Fleur Cannon, it is drawing energy from the world around it. Is that a cost the princess ever understood? Did the ancient inventor foresee the moral weight of a creature that must take life to sustain its own? These three stories, Mewtwo type, Null, Morgana, form a trilogy of human overreach. Each represents a different failure. Mewtwo was a failure of empathy. Type Null was a failure of ethics. Morgana, perhaps, is the most ambiguous. A success of engineering, but a question mark in philosophy. The threads that connect them are fear and ambition. Fear of the unknown, of the meteor, of the ultra beast, of the chaos that nature throws at us. An ambition to rise above it, to become the creators ourselves. But what happens when the civilization that builds these gods crumbles? What happens when the knowledge is lost, and all that remains are the constructs themselves, waiting in the dark? That is the question that leads us to the ruins of a forgotten world, where 6 silent statues stand guard over a mystery no one has fully solved. Artificial creations. That's where we left off last time. Mewtwo, the perfect weapon born in a Cinnabar Island basement. Type Null, a god assembled from spare parts. Man playing god with science, with technology. But what happens when that technology is so ancient, so far beyond our own, that it doesn't even look like technology anymore? What happens when the machines are carved from ice and stone, and they outlast every empire that built them? You've seen them, you've probably even woken them up. The Titans of Hoenn, Regirock, Regis, Registeel, the sealed guardians of the sealed chamber. But what if I told you that those 3 are just the tip of a buried continent? That across the world, from the frozen peaks of Sinnoh to the misty reaches of Galar, the same silent watchmen stand waiting in their temples, carved with the same script, built with the same purpose. And that purpose, that civilization that placed them there, is nowhere to be found. This is the mystery of the lost civilization of the Regis. Let's start with the facts, because the facts are strange enough on their own. In the Hoenn region, deep beneath Route 120, there is a cave. Inside that cave, you can read an inscription in a language you aren't meant to understand. But the game designers gave you the key. It's a Braille cipher. It says, "We who made this were carved from the deep. We left our message in Pokémon. Then we went to the void." That is the entire testimony of the civilization that built the Regis. They carved themselves, or rather, they carved these golems out of the earth and then they vanished. But the Braille is not unique to Hoenn. In Sinnoh at the Snowpoint Temple, a colossus named Regis sleeps. It is said to have moved continents. It pulled the continents into place, and it is sealed behind a door that requires the exact same Braille pattern to open. You need to bring Regis, and Registeel from Hoenn to even reach it. That means whoever built those three built Regis too, or Regis was the original, the one that created the others. The mythology says Regis towed the continents with ropes. That's not a legend you tell about a single Pokémon living in one cave. That is the founding myth of an entire planet's geography. But then Galar steps into the picture. In the Crown Tundra, beneath the freezing lake, you find two more Regis, Regieleki and Regidrago. And to unlock their shrine, you need to assemble a pattern from yet another set of ruins, also in Braille, also using the same symbols. And when you read the inscription there, you find the phrase, "We who made this were carved from the deep again." The exact same wording, the exact same script. This is not a coincidence. This is a civilization that spanned at least 3 regions, Hoenn, Sinnoh and Galar, and likely more, because the language is the same, and the iconography is the same. The giants all have the same 7-dot facial pattern, the same cyclopean, monolithic appearance. They are products of the same hand, the same era, the same lost empire. So who were these people? What did they call themselves? We have no name for them. The games give none. The lore leaves a blank where their culture should be, but we can piece together clues from the Pokémon themselves. The Regis are not natural. Regirock is assembled from boulders. Regis is formed from glacial ice. Registeel is forged from metal. They are golems, artificial life animated by a force that isn't technology as we understand it. They have the ability to change their form, to absorb materials, to adapt. Regigigas can create them from the elements around it. That suggests the civilization didn't just build one giant. They built a species of servant, and then they left them behind. Why would they vanish overnight? The phrase, "we went to the void," is chilling. It doesn't say they died. It says they went somewhere. Could they have left this world entirely? Could they have ascended or migrated to another dimension? Or could the Regis themselves have been the cause? There's a theory that the original civilization, in their hubris, created Regigigas to reshape the world, but that the power required was so immense that it triggered a cataclysm. You'll notice that Regigigas has the ability slow start. It takes time for it to reach full strength. That might be a safety mechanism, a limit imposed by its creators to prevent it from acting too quickly. And yet in the lore, Regigigas once moved continents. That's not a slow start. That's a force of nature let loose. Perhaps the civilization realized their mistake and sealed the golems away, but the damage was already done. Or perhaps they simply left before the golems could turn on them. But the most haunting detail is the silence. There are no ruins of houses, no tools, no writing beyond the Braille. The civilization left only the golems and the message. Everything else has been erased. That kind of disappearance isn't gradual, it's a vanishing. One day, the Empire is there, building titanic machines to pull the continents and guard its secrets. The next day, nothing. Only the giants remain, waiting in their chambers, still following the last order they received. Awaken only when someone proves worthy, and someone always does. The player, you. And when you awaken them, you become the vessel for that lost civilization's final act. You carry their legacy forward. You fight with their golems. You use their power. You even command Regigigas itself. But you never learn their name. You never learn why they truly left. Unless the answer lies in what happens when all the Regis are assembled. In the myths, Regigigas can create new Regis. In the anime, there are more. Regigigas once led an entire army of Regis, each with a different elemental form. Ice, rock, steel. but also Electric Dragon, Ghost, and others. Could it be that the original civilization built not just 6 or 7, but dozens, and those Regis are still out there, buried in other regions, waiting for the key to unlock them? We haven't found them all yet, and maybe we never will. But the fact that the same script appears in Hoenn, Sinnoh, and Galar tells us that the Empire was global, that it connected every landmass we know, that before there were regions, there was a single people, speaking a single language, carving their gods from the bones of the earth, and then they walked into the void. So the question we're left with is not just who they were, but what they were running from. Because when a civilization builds servants strong enough to move continents and then disappears without a trace, you have to wonder, was their disappearance a choice, or was it an escape? Something vast was stirring even then, something that would later be sealed away by other ancient peoples. Weather that would be slumbering until the land and sea cried out in conflict. That story, the tale of the eternal slumber and the forces that must never be fully awakened, is what we turn to next. Because you cannot talk about the earth being shaped without talking about the ones who shaped the very sky and ocean, and they are still dreaming, just beneath the waves, just under the crust, waiting for a reason to rise again. The previous chapter left us standing among the silent stone giants, their carved faces staring out from ruins scattered across continents, a forgotten empire whose language still hums in the circuitry of Regis and its kin. But if the Regi represent a civilization that tried to shape the world through technology and obedience, then the Weather Trio represents something far older, far more raw, and far less controllable. The empire of the Regi may have been built by human hands, but the reign of Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza was never meant to be built at all. It was meant to be balanced precariously on a knife's edge between sea and land, between expansion and restraint. And that balance, as we will see, has been threatened more than once, not by nature, but by the very artifacts meant to preserve it. In Hoenn, the eternal struggle between Kyogre and Groudon is not merely a myth from a forgotten age. It is a cycle that has repeated itself for millennia, a geological heartbeat that pulses beneath the region's tectonic plates. When Kyogre awakens, it expands the oceans, swallowing coastlines and flooding ancient cities. When Groudon stirs, it raises continents, pulling land from the depths and scorching the sky with volcanic ash. And between them, Rayquaza patrols the upper atmosphere, a celestial peacekeeper whose very presence keeps the other two locked in an uneasy dormancy. But dormancy is not death, it is sleep, and sleep can be disturbed. The question that haunts Hoenn's deepest lore is not whether these creatures exist, but how humans came to control them. The answer lies in two objects, the blue orb and the red orb. On the surface, they appear to be simple artifacts, stones carved with ancient symbols, glowing faintly with an energy that seems almost organic. But when you look closer, you realize that these orbs are not merely technological devices. They are not batteries or remote controls. They are crystallized primal energy, condensed from the very life force of Kyogre and Groudon themselves. Some scholars argue that the orbs were created by the ancient Hoenn people as a means of communication, a way to speak to the Titans without waking them fully. Others believe the orbs are fragments of the Titans themselves, pieces of their being that were separated and preserved long before humans ever set foot in Hoenn. The truth may be both. A technology so advanced that it mimics nature, or a natural phenomenon so powerful that it looks like technology. Either way, the orbs hold the key to awakening, or calming, the Weather Trio. And where do you find these orbs? Not in a museum, not in a temple. You find them in caves that do not stay still. The Cave of Origin, hidden deep beneath Hoenn's landmass, is not just a cave. It is a shifting gateway, a pocket of reality that moves with the seasons, with the tides, with the will of the legends themselves. Some explorers have reported entering the Cave of Origin, only to emerge in the Marine Cave or the Terror Cave, hundreds of miles away, as if the caves themselves are breathing, rearranging their interiors to prevent intruders from reaching the orbs. The marine cave appears only during certain lunar phases, and only when Kyogre is restless. The Terror Cave opens only when Groudon is stirring beneath the earth. They are not separate locations. They are the same place, viewed through different lenses of space and time, a gateway that chooses when to let you pass. What happens when the balance of nature is permanently tilted? This is not a theoretical question in Hoenn. It is a recorded event. The ancient records describe a time when Groudon rose unchecked, expanding the land until the sea was barely a memory, and the world became a desert of cracked rock and endless heat. Then, in another age, Kyogre retaliated, drowning every continent under miles of salt water, leaving only peaks above the waves. Each time Rayquaza descended, halting the destruction, but the damage was done. The ecosystem had been rewritten. Species that could not adapt were erased. Coastlines that had stood for millennia were redrawn, and when the dust settled, the orbs were placed back in their shifting caves, and humanity rebuilt on the ruins of a world that had been nearly unmade. So what does that mean for the present? The orbs still exist. The caves still shift. The weather trio still sleeps, but their sleep is restless. And if someone, or something, were to tilt that balance again, deliberately this time, the consequences would not be a slow geological shift. They would be a cataclysm. The blue orb and the red orb are not trophies. They are detonators. The Cave of Origin is not a resting place. It is a waiting room. And the eternal slumber of Kyogre, Groudon and Rayquaza is not a guarantee. It is a fragile, ongoing miracle that depends on the world forgetting what lies beneath its surface. But Hoenn has not forgotten. The ancient people who built the seafloor cavern, who carved the symbols into the Cave of Origin, who sealed the orbs in the deepest chambers, they knew that knowledge is a burden. They knew that if the balance were ever tilted permanently, no Rayquaza might descend in time. And that is the mystery that lingers. Not whether the weather trio exists, but whether we are smart enough to leave them alone. As we begin to turn our attention away from Hoenn's watery depths and volcanic heights, we find ourselves drawn to a different kind of mystery, one that is not written in stone or shaped from primal energy. Next, we will step into the silent realm of the Unown, where symbols themselves hold power, and where a language older than any civilization may be trying to speak to us from the shadows of a forgotten dimension. The mystery of the Unown is not about creatures that reshape the world. It is about a world that reshapes us. Through the very act of writing, the Unown are among the most puzzling creatures in the Pokémon world, because they defy almost every category we try to place them in. They are not legendary, they are not mythical, and they are not even particularly powerful on their own. And yet, they appear in ancient ruins across multiple regions. They are tied directly to the creation myth of Sinnoh, and they exhibit a behavior that suggests they are far more than just ordinary Pokémon. The weather trio may command the seas and the skies, but the Unown, these strange floating alphabet symbols, seem to command something far more abstract. They seem to command meaning itself. To understand them, we have to go back to the ruins where they first appeared in the modern era. The Kalosian Ruins in Sinnoh are one of the primary places where Unown can be found. Located just outside Kalosian town, these underground chambers are lined with ancient carvings that depict the same symbols that the Unown themselves form. The walls are covered in them, row after row of letters that seem to spell out something. Though no one has ever fully deciphered what that message might be, it is as if the ruins themselves are a library, and the Unown are the characters that fill its pages. But the Kalosian Ruins are not the only place. In the Sevi Islands, far to the south of Kanto, there is another network of ruins known as the Tanabe Ruins. This location is even more remote, accessible only by crossing deep water and navigating through dense jungle. The Tanabe Ruins consist of 7 chambers, each one dedicated to a different letter of the Unown alphabet, and just like in Kalosian, the walls are covered in markings. The architecture is different, The style of the carvings is different, yet the symbols are the same. This raises an immediate question. Who built these ruins, and why did they choose the same system of symbols in two completely separate parts of the world? The connection between the Kalosian Ruins and the Tanobi Ruins in Sevier is not coincidental. It suggests that the Unown are not just random Pokémon, but that they are part of a global network of ancient knowledge. Some researchers have proposed that the Unown are actually the written language of a civilization that predates all known history. If that is true, then the ruins are not just buildings. They are archives, repositories of information that the Unown themselves help to preserve. But that raises an even deeper question. Are the Unown simply the messages, or are they the messengers? This is where the lore becomes truly strange. In the mythology of Sinnoh, Arceus is said to have created the universe. But before Arceus created time and space, before Dialga and Palkia were born, some legends claim that the first things to emerge were the Unown. They are described as the building blocks of reality, the fundamental symbols from which everything else was written. In that sense, they might be considered the DNA of the universe, the smallest units of information that, when arranged in the right pattern, can generate anything. A language so ancient that it is not just spoken or written, but embodied in living beings. But are Unown the DNA of the universe, or are they the tools of Arceus? There is a crucial distinction. If they are DNA, then they are passive. They are the raw material, the code that exists without intention. If they are tools, then they are active, capable of being used by a higher power to shape reality. The evidence from the games and the anime suggests the latter might be more accurate. In the Pokémon film, Spell of the Unown, a young girl named Molly Hale uses a set of Unown to warp reality, creating an entire castle out of imagination and turning her father into a statue. The Unown respond to thought. They take the wishes of those who can communicate with them and make them real. This is not the behavior of passive code. This is the behavior of a tool that is waiting for a hand to wield it. And that tool only becomes powerful when it is wielded by many. An individual Unown is almost harmless. In battle, it can only use the move Hidden Power, which varies in type, but is never especially strong. But when Unown gather in massive, hive mind clusters, their collective power becomes something else entirely. In the games, you can find Unown in groups, and while each one is still weak, the number of them suggests a swarm intelligence. In the anime, when a large number of Unown gather, they can create entire pocket dimensions, manipulate time, and even communicate across vast distances. This collective power is key to understanding what they really are. They are not meant to be solitary. They are meant to form a network, a living, thinking alphabet that can write new rules into existence. Why Unown only gain power when gathered in massive, hive mind clusters may be because they are incomplete on their own. Each one is just a letter. Alone, a letter can do very little. But when you combine letters into words, and words into sentences, you create meaning. You create intention. The Unown, in their clusters, are not just a group of Pokémon. They are a sentence being spoken, a story being told. The more of them there are, the more complex and potent that story becomes. This is why the ruins are designed with so many chambers and corridors. They are not just storage rooms. They are sentences. Each chamber is a word, and the entire ruin is a paragraph, a message that has been waiting to be read. If that is true, then the question of whether Unown are the DNA of the universe or the tools of Arceus might be a false dichotomy. They could be both. DNA is itself a kind of tool. It is the mechanism by which life is written and rewritten. Arceus, in creating the Unown, may have created the very medium through which all of existence could be shaped. The Unown are the letters, and reality is the page, and the ruins. The ruins are the books that tell the history of that writing. But there is a darker possibility. If the Unown can respond to human thought, then they can be used to write terrible things as well as beautiful ones. The ancient builders of the Kalosian and Tanobi ruins may have known this. They may have sealed the Unown away in these underground, chambers, not just to preserve their knowledge, but to contain their power. Because if the Unown are truly the alphabet of creation, then a being like Arceus might not be the only one who can use them. Anyone who learns to speak this ancient language could potentially rewrite the world. And that is a mystery that reaches far beyond a single region. It is a mystery that connects the ruins of Kanto, Johto, Sinnoh, and beyond. A thread that runs through the very fabric of the universe. And that thread leads us to something even more vast. Something that involves not just the symbols, but the stars themselves. Because if the Unown are the language of creation, then who or what is writing the cosmic story? That is a question for another time, but it is one we are about to answer. The Unown are often described as the building blocks of language. But what if they are also the building blocks of something far larger? What if their strange ancient script is not just a record of human thought, but a remnant of a cosmic signal? Their presence in ruins across Johto and the Sevier Islands hints at a connection to Arceus, the creator, but also to something beyond the boundaries of our world, something that does not belong to the earth under our feet. And this brings us to a haunting question that has lingered in the margins of every region's history. What if the Pokémon world has never been isolated? Or if the stars above are not just points of light, but doorways? And what comes through them is far stranger than any legendary born from magma or ocean currents. Consider the beings that carry the unmistakable signature of an extraterrestrial origin. Deoxys, for instance, is not a native of this world. It arrived from a meteor, a single viral organism capable of reshaping its own genetic structure. When it crashed into the ozone layer, it was intercepted by Rayquaza, the Sky Guardian, and the two fought a battle that left the heavens scarred. Deoxys is a creature of pure adaptability, its form shifting between attack, defense, and speed, as if it were still learning the rules of a new planet. Its very name suggests deoxyribonucleic acid, the fundamental code of life, yet it came from a rock hurtling through space. That meteor was not empty. It carried a purpose we have never fully understood. Then there is Jirachi, the wish Pokémon, whose story is tied to a 1,000-year cycle. It sleeps for most of that time, awakening only when a comet passes close to Earth. The comet itself is its cradle. Jirachi's body is sealed inside a crystalline shell, and its awakening is said to grant wishes to whoever reads the writings on its tag. But think about the implications. A creature that hibernates in interstellar travel, waiting for a precise moment in its orbit before it can touch down and interact with the world. Is Jirachi a messenger, a child of some ancient civilization that launched it into space? Or is it a living seed, meant to be planted every millennium? The comet route is not random, it repeats, and each awakening is a chance for the world to ask for something it desperately needs. And then there are the Minior. These small, colourful beings are born in the stratosphere, but they fall to the earth as meteorites. Their bodies are made of a hard shell that cracks open to reveal a glowing core, a miniature star burning inside each one. When they are in danger, they retreat into their shell and fall. They are literally falling from the sky. They live among the clouds, but their origins are the same as Deoxys, the debris of space, the leftovers of planetary formation. They are not unique. They are numerous, and that is the key. Deoxys, Jirachi, and Minior are not rare anomalies. They represent a pattern, a frequency of extraterrestrial life that the Pokémon world absorbs and integrates into its ecosystems. The world does not reject them, it welcomes them, it adapts to them. So the question becomes, did these beings choose this world, or were they drawn here? And if they are drawn here, what is the signal that pulls them in? That signal might be something as simple as a melody. In the Alola region, far from the ancient ruins of Sinnoh or the craters of Hoenn, there exists a pair of instruments known as the Sun Flute and the Moon Flute. They are not ordinary flutes made for human celebration. They are keys tuned to a wavelength that bridges dimensions. When played at the altar of the sun or the altar of the moon, they do not just produce sound, they open a rift in space. It is through that rift that beings like Solgaleo and Lunala emerge. Creatures that are not merely legendary, but are said to dwell in the ultraspace, a dimension that lies between worlds. The flutes are tools of summoning. They call to the stars. They call to the void between stars. Consider the craftsmanship of such an instrument. Who made them? The ancient people of Alola knew something we have forgotten. They knew that the universe is not silent. It hums with frequencies. And if you can play the right note, you can pull something through. The same principle may apply to the azure flute used in Sinnoh, a legendary item that was never officially released, but is said to summon Arceus himself. That flute too calls to a creator from beyond normal space. The moon and sun flutes are not isolated artifacts. They are part of a network of tools designed to communicate with the cosmos. But why would a civilization build such things? Was Alola once a listening post, a lighthouse for interstellar travelers? Or was it a sanctuary, a place where cosmic beings could be called down to rest? This brings us to the unsettling possibility that the Pokémon world is not merely a random planet that happens to host life. It may be a target, a nursery, a deliberate destination for creatures that are born in space and raised by the planet's energy. Think about how Minior's core glows like a star. Think about how Jirachi's comet returns on schedule. Think about how Deoxys came with a purpose to fight, to adapt, to survive. These are not accidents of the universe. They are passengers who followed a beacon. And if the world is a nursery, then who planted the seeds? Who shaped the soil? The same hands that carved the Unown into the ruins of Solaceon may have also set the orbit of Jirachi's comet and aimed the meteor that carried Deoxys. They are all part of a design we are only beginning to see the edges of. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether cosmic life exists in the Pokémon world, but why so many of those beings feel at home here. Why do they not simply pass by? Why do they stay, integrate, even become part of the regional Pokédex? There is a gravitational pull to this world. Something deeper than physics, something ancient and patient. And as we watch the shadows of those flying saucers and the trails of falling stars, we realize that the line between myth and astronomy is blurring. The stars are not just above us. They are here, sleeping in the ocean depths, waiting in the ozone layer, circling the planet on a 1,000-year loop. And every once in a while, someone picks up a flute and plays a note that makes the sky shiver. But what happens when the music stops? What happens when the summons is answered, not by a single being, but by a convergence? When all those threads, the ancient scripts, the comets, the viruses, the flutes, the falling stars, come together in a single moment, and the timeline of the world is forced to choose a direction. That is a story that cannot be told from the perspective of one region alone. It is a story that requires the alignment of many stars, and we are about to see those stars begin to turn. The previous chapter left us staring into the deep black of space, where Deoxys drifts, where Jirachi slumbers in the asteroid belt, where Minior falls from the heavens like fragments of a dying star. The moon flute, the sun flute, tools not just of Alola, but of a cosmic pattern that suggests the Pokémon world has always looked outward. But if you trace the starry threads back to their source, you find something even stranger. The sky is not the only place where other worlds hide. They press against our own, sometimes overlapping, sometimes diverging, a tapestry of parallel timelines that the games have only hinted at until one decisive moment changed everything. That moment came in Hoenn during the Delta episode. After you become champion, after you have mastered the Hoenn League, a crisis erupts from space. A massive meteor is on a collision course with the planet, and the solution is not a weapon, not a shield, but a summoning. You, the player, are tasked with calling Rayquaza from the depths of the atmosphere. But to do so, you need the Keystone and the Megastone, and you need to understand the truth that Professor Cosmo has spent a lifetime piecing together. In his research, he reveals something astonishing. This meteor is not just a rock, it is a piece of another reality. The energy that fuels mega evolution, the same energy that powers the Keystones, is actually a form of energy that can tear holes between dimensions, and the meteor that threatens Hoenn is a fragment of a shattered world. This is the moment the games explicitly confirm the multiverse theory. The Delta episode does not just hint at parallel worlds, it makes them central to the plot. You travel to the Sky Pillar, you awaken Rayquaza, and you ride it into space to destroy the meteor. But the lore behind it is even deeper. The meteor carries a creature called Deoxys, which we discussed in the previous chapter as an extraterrestrial. But the Delta episode confirms that Deoxys is a virus from space, one that can adapt to any environment, including the fabric of reality itself. And the reason it came to Hoenn, it was pulled by the dimensional energy released from the ancient wars of Hoenn. Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre clashed so violently that they sent ripples through the timeline. But this is not the only piece of evidence for the multiverse. Look at the Link Cord. In the games, it is an item used to evolve Pokémon that require trading, but the name itself is a clue, a cord that links. In the lore, the Link Cord is said to connect two souls across any distance. But what if that distance is not just between two trainers in the same room, but between two trainers in entirely separate timelines? The Wonder Trade deepens this mystery. When you throw a Pokémon into the void of the Wonder Trade, you receive a Pokémon from someone else, somewhere else. But the system is random, unpredictable. No one knows where the Pokémon go or where they come from. In the context of a multiverse, the Wonder Trade is not a simple online mechanic. It is a portal. Every time you send a Pokémon into that digital abyss, you are sending it to another timeline. And the fact that you can receive a Pokémon. And then there is the item called the Link Cable. In the games, it is a key item that allows you to trade locally, but its description in recent titles hints at something more. It is described as a cable used to connect two devices, but also to connect two worlds. This is the physical manifestation of the multiverse. The Link Cable is a bridge, and when you use it, you are stepping into another dimension. The Pokémon world is not alone. It is a node in a web of countless realities, each one slightly different. Some are ruled by Team Magma, some by Team Aqua. Some have mega evolutions, some do not. Some have never seen a meteor. And the beings responsible for maintaining the stability of this web are Celebi and Dialga. Celebi, the time travel Pokémon, is often seen as a gentle guardian of the forest, but its power is far more profound. Celebi can move through time freely, but it also patrols the timeline, ensuring that no single traveler creates a paradox that unravels reality. In the Pokémon Mystery Dungeon series, Celebi plays a crucial role in preventing catastrophic changes to the past. But in the mainline games, Celebi appears in the Elex Forest, a place where time flows strangely. The forest itself is a nexus. The shrine there is dedicated to Celebi, and when you offer a certain item, Celebi appears. But why there? Because the Ilex Forest is a thin place. The veil between timelines is weakest there, and then there is Dialga, the Pokémon of time. Dialga does not just control time, it controls the flow of causality. In the lore, Dialga resides in a dimension called the Temporal Tower, or in the deepest parts of Mount Coronet, where time congeals into a solid, tangible force. In the games, Dialga can be summoned with the Adamant Orb, a crystal that is said to be a fragment of Dialga's own being. But the most revealing detail comes from the Mystery Zone, a glitched area in older games where Dialga could be found. That area is not real. It is a place outside time, a null space where multiple timelines converge. And when you encounter Dialga there, it is not angry, it is watchful. It knows you should not be there. Celebi and Dialga are not rivals. They are partners in a silent cosmic task. Celebi handles the small adjustments, the gentle nudges. Dialga handles the massive rewrites, the turning of entire eras. Together, they keep the multiverse from collapsing into a single, contradictory mess. But if there are multiple timelines, then what about the places where those timelines touch? The Delta episode showed us that the meteor was a fragment of another world, but the meteor also carried the virus that became Deoxys. And Deoxys, as we learned, can shapeshift into 4 forms. 4, because Deoxys adapts to its environment. In one timeline, it took a defensive form. In another, it became fast. In a third, it grew strong. And in the fourth, it remains neutral. Deoxys is not just a Pokémon. It is a living reminder that every timeline has its own version of reality. And then there is the strange case of the link trade itself. In the early games, the idea of trading Pokémon between versions was a simple gameplay mechanic, but the lore behind it has grown richer. The Pokémon you receive from a trade often has a different trainer ID, a different origin. In the world of the multiverse, that Pokémon did not come from another copy of the same game. It came from another universe. And when you trade, you are not just exchanging data, you are exchanging matter between 2 realities. This is why the Wonder Trade is such a fascinating mystery. It is a system that exists outside the normal rules of space and time. The Pokémon you send into the Wonder Trade never returns to you. It goes to someone else. But who? In the lore, the answer may be that it goes to a version of you in another timeline, or to a trainer who needs that Pokémon to complete their Pokédex in a world where certain species never evolved. The Wonder Trade is a mercy system, a way for the multiverse to balance itself. And what of the link cord? In Pokémon Legends, Arceus, the link cord is a key item used to evolve Pokémon like Kadabra or Machoke without trading. But the description says it is a cord that links 2 beings. In the ancient past of Hisui, trainers did not have global networks. They did not have Wonder Trade, but they still had the ability to evolve these Pokémon. How? Because the link cord is a physical manifestation of a connection that transcends distance. It is a tool that allows the trainer to reach into another timeline and pull the evolution energy from a parallel version of the Pokémon. The multiverse theory confirmed in the Delta episode is not just a footnote in Pokémon lore, it is the foundation upon which every mystery rests. The ancient wars, the ultimate weapon, the darkest day, the great crater of Paldea, these are not isolated events. They are the same events playing out differently in different timelines. Some worlds saw Kalos destroyed by the ultimate weapon, others saw it become a paradise. Some worlds have no mega evolution because the dimensional rift that caused it never opened, and the player's journey, the one we all experience, is just one thread in an infinite weave. But here is the unsettling part. If the multiverse is real, then every choice you make in the games creates a new timeline. When you choose to save the game, you are freezing one timeline and creating another. The developers have even hinted at this in recent titles. In Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the Dex Nav can show wild Pokémon with special moves they should not normally have. The explanation is that these Pokémon are from another dimension. They have slipped through the cracks. And in the end, what maintains the stability of all these timelines? Celebi and Dialga are not the only ones. There is a third force, one we have not yet mentioned, a being that exists outside time and space, a being that is the source of all creation. That being is Arceus. But Arceus is not just a creator, it is a record keeper. In the Hall of Origin, Arceus sits on a platform floating in a void. That void is the space between timelines. Arceus watches every world, every version, every possibility. And if one timeline becomes too powerful, if it threatens to overwrite the others, Arceus can snuff it out. The multiverse is fragile. It is held together by the threads of Celebi's time travel, by the pulse of Dialga's heartbeat, and by the silent judgment of Arceus. And we, as trainers, are the accidental travelers who stumble between worlds every time we trade, every time we use a link cord, every time we send a Pokémon into the Wonder Trade. The strangest mysteries are not hidden in ruins or caves. They are hidden in the very mechanics of the games we play. The link cord is a key, the Wonder Trade is a door, and the Delta episode is the moment we realized that the door was always open. But if the multiverse is real, then there must be a single point where all timelines converge. A place where the fabric of reality meets itself. A theory that ties everything together. That is the next mystery we must unravel. The grand unified theory. the one explanation that might reveal why the Pokémon world is so full of contradictions, why ancient technology coexists with cosmic beings, and why every region seems to have its own creation myth that points to the same origin. That is what we will explore next. We have seen that the multiverse is real. The Delta episode proved it, and the link cord, the Wonder Trade, the very fabric of the game itself, all whisper of infinite parallel worlds stacked beside our own. But if there are countless realities, what is the thread that binds them? What is the single story that repeats, with different names and different faces in every single one? Look back at the wars we have traced. Kalos, a kingdom shattered by a weapon that could turn life to stone and stone to life. The Darkest Day in Galar, where a meteor carrying a creature of pure chaos nearly swallowed the land in eternal night. The ancient conflict in Hoenn, when Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre fought for dominion over the very continents and seas. These are not isolated events. They are the same event, played out on different stages, each time with different orchestrators. Now consider the gods. Arceus, the alpha Pokémon, born from an egg in a void of nothing, creating Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina to shape time, space, and antimatter. But Arceus is not alone. The Weather Trio of Hoenn, the Lake Guardians of Sinnoh, the Tao Trio of Unova, the Light Trio of Alola, the Swords of Justice, the Forces of Nature. Each region has its own pantheon, its own creation myth, its own set of beings who either built the world or destroyed it. And yet they all share a common structure, a trio of primary forces, a creator or a balance keeper, an aberration that threatens that balance. Then there is the technology, the ultimate weapon of Kalos, built by AZ after the Kalos War, fueled by the life energy of countless Pokémon. It was a machine that could grant immortality, but at the cost of countless lives. The red and blue orbs, used to control the primal forms of Groudon and Kyogre. Were they simply crystallized energy, or were they ancient devices, crafted by a civilization that understood the power of legendaries better than we do? The Keystones and Megastones, the Z-Rings, the Dynamax Bands, Terra Orbs. Each is a piece of technology that taps into a hidden energy source, each invented or discovered in a different era, but all pointing to single truth. The people of this world have always sought to harness the power of the gods. So what happens when we place these wars, these gods, and these technologies on a single timeline? The pattern begins to emerge. The Pokémon world is not a straight line of progress. It is a cycle of creation, destruction, and rebirth. Each region has a great mystery, a cataclysm that nearly ended everything. In Kalos, it was the war and the weapon. In Hoenn, it was the primal clash. In Galar, the darkest day. In Sinnoh, the very creation of the universe. In Alola, the opening of ultra wormholes. In Paldea, the formation of the great crater. And what is the great crater of Paldea, if not the scar of an ancient impact? The text says it formed 1 million years ago. 1 million years. That is not a geological accident. That is a wound. A wound that still bleeds terrestrial energy. A phenomenon that allows Pokémon to crystallize and change type. What caused that impact? A meteor? A legendary fallen from the sky? Or something else? Something from beyond the multiverse, crashing into this reality at a specific point in time. Now we have the full picture. The wars are not random. The gods are not separate. The technology is not merely inventive. They are all part of a repeating loop. The world is born. The world builds. The world overreaches. The world ends. And then it begins again. Arceus creates the first universe. The Sinnoh region rises, falls, and its myths become the foundation for later religions. The Weather Trio battle, leaving Hoenn reshaped. The ultimate weapon fires, turning a thriving Kalos into a land of ghosts. The darkest day descends, and Galar rebuilds from the ashes. The ultra wormholes crack open, and Alola learns to live with the chaos. The great crater forms, and Paldea's future is forever altered. Each event echoes the others. Each legend borrows from the past. The link cord across dimensions is not just a gameplay mechanic. It is a reminder that every world is connected, and every world experiences the same cycle. The ultimate revelation is this: there is no single grand unified theory that explains all of existence with one neat formula. Instead, the theory is that the universe itself is a story, and that story is always the same: a beginning, an end, and then a new beginning. So what is the next great mystery? Based on the patterns of the past, it will be a new region, a new catastrophe, and a new technology to either control it or survive it. Perhaps a region built on the ruins of the previous cycle, where the next great weapon is already being designed. Perhaps a legendary that is not a guardian, but a reset switch. Perhaps a civilization that knows the cycle is coming and is trying to break it. The fragments are already there, scattered across every region. The Unown are the building blocks. The link cords are the threads. The keystones are the keys. One final thought. If the Pokémon world is a cycle of destruction and rebirth, then what we call the present in the games is simply the quiet time between storms. The player characters arrive just after one catastrophe and just before the next. They are not heroes who prevent disaster. They are healers who patch the world back together long enough for the next wave to hit. And that is the deepest mystery of all. Who or what decides when the cycle resets? And what happens when someone finally figures out how to stop the cycle, or how to step outside of it entirely? That answer, perhaps, lies in a region we have not yet visited, or in a dimension we have not yet glimpsed. But the clues are all here, waiting for someone to read them. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.